Chapter 658. There was a faint aroma of food in the air. Shi Mengwan was wearing the clothes that Qiao Zhe had bought. She scooped up the food in the kitchen and carried it out. Qiao Zhe sat on the small table like a master. It was unknown where Qiao Zhe found this table. Previously, Shi Mengwan and Qiao Zhe were eating at the coffee table. This morning, she cooked porridge. When she brought it to the coffee table, she felt that it was very inconvenient to eat on the sofa. She had to bend over. "We should get a table," she said. "Wouldn't it be more comfortable to sit down and eat?" When she said that, Qiao Zhe moved the table over at noon. It was a square table that was commonly seen in the countryside. There were also 2 chairs that were brought along with him. Shi Mengwan didn't even know how Qiao Zhe appeared. She watched as Qiao Zhe picked up the bowl and ate in big mouthfuls. The youth was still growing, so his appetite was astonishing. She basically cooked according to the amount of food she used to eat with her parents when they were at home. But other than her share, the rest went into the youth's stomach. The young man ate so much, but he didn't seem fat at all. He has lost a lot of weight. He sure had a lot of energy. Just now, when the table had been moved in, he had moved it in alone. She had asked for help, but he had refused. After resting for 2 days, the wounds on his face had healed a lot. There was only a bruise at the corner of his mouth. He could already see the youth's true appearance. He had an extremely good-looking face with long and narrow eyes. Shi Mengwan's previous school, the town she lived in, and the people she met after coming to Lin City, none of them were as good-looking as Zhang Haoze. He didn't lose to those celebrities on TV at all. It was just that this image was a little bad. His hand was injured, so he didn't hold the bowl. He just held it weakly. They ate like this. His posture was inevitably a little ugly. If this happened at home and her grandmother saw this, she would definitely scold her. He said that they had no manners and did not even hold their bowls properly. The youth noticed that Shi Mengwan was staring at him. He stopped eating and stared at Shi Mengwan. "What are you looking at?" As soon as the young man opened his mouth, his pretty face was ruined. Her voice during the puberty period was really not pleasant to hear. Shi Mengwan was caught peeping at the youth, so she looked a little uncomfortable. No matter what, she was only 12 years old this year. Staring at a boy like this was really too unrestrained. "I just want to ask, where did you get that table?" The youth didn't say anything. He finished the rice in his bowl in a few bites. When he went to scoop the next bowl of rice, he glanced at Shi Mengwan. "What? Afraid my desk was stolen. What if they come looking for you?" She didn't. Without waiting for Shi Mengwan to explain, the youth snorted. "Don't worry. I didn't steal it. No one will come to catch you. Big brother." Shi Mengwan bit her lip. She was a little hurt by the youth's hostile and impatient attitude. "I was just curious. I picked it up," the young man answered casually. "If I were going to steal, I wouldn't steal such a crappy table." Indeed, it was a little rotten. Look at the corner of the table, the paint had peeled off. Shi Mengwan didn't ask any more and ate quietly. However, when she saw the youth put down the bowl, she had a new question. "Where did you get the money to buy groceries?" The ones she bought yesterday and the ones she bought today. If she only gave the youth a few dozen yuan, it would not be enough. One had to know that the young man had actually bought ribs and meat today. Not only that, the young man also gave some rice and flour to the family. She was really curious. The young man relaxed his body on the chair. After eating and drinking his fill, the unruly and sinister aura on his body faded a little. "Don't worry. I didn't steal or rob. I came above board. Shi Mengwan looked at him with a hint of confusion in her eyes. I can't ask. No. The young man was very arrogant. Shi Mengwan didn't ask anymore. She lowered her head and continued to eat, but she muttered softly. The young man heard that sentence. The young man knocked on the table. What do you mean? Speak clearly. Shi Mengwan stopped talking, but the young man suddenly moved his face closer. The table was old and not big. The young man suddenly moved so close that Shi Mengwan almost let go of the bowl she was holding. Let me tell you, I'll worry about the money. It's not your turn. After saying that, as if he was afraid that Shi Mengwan wouldn't listen to him, he pointed his index finger at her face. Remember. Got it. If you dare to pick up trash, I'll cripple you first. Shi Mengwan didn't say anything. She looked at the young man and asked her question for the first time, Dear brother, where are your parents? Why are you living here alone? Moreover, other than the simplest furniture, there wasn't a single photo in the house. There wasn't even a trace of adult life. My parents are dead. The young man glanced at her and sneered. What about you, where are your parents? Why did you come here alone? I heard you speak, and you sound a little different from the locals of Lin City. You're not from this city, are you? What about your parents? Why don't they care about you? Shi Mengwan bit her lip and thought of her grandmother, who valued boys over girls, and her mother, who had just given birth to a little sister but was despised by her grandmother. It's not that they don't care about me, it's that I ran away from home. You're quite bold. The young man stared at Shi Mengwan and clicked his tongue. With your looks, you dare to run away from home. Nothing happened to her. She was really lucky. She asked for it when she met the two hooligans that day. What's wrong with my looks? Shi Mengwan's mother was a beauty. Shi Mengwan really didn't think she was good-looking. The young man suddenly moved his face closer and stared straight at her. Shi Mengwan felt uncomfortable being stared at by him. What are you doing? Do you really not know, or are you pretending not to know? The young man moved so close that she could clearly see the fine hairs on his skin. After all, she was a little girl, so she felt embarrassed. Shi Mengwan stepped back a little. Forget it, I won't tease you anymore. She wasn't like herself, who grew up in the streets. She was very clear about these things. She was just a child. The young man felt bored, so he stood up and walked out. Where are you going? Let's go. Perhaps he felt that his tone was a little bad. The young man added in his duck-like voice, I'm going to earn money. Aren't you always worried that I don't have money? I'm going to earn it now. Who was worried that he didn't have money? Shi Mengwan wasn't worried at all. Your hand is still injured. What do you want to do? Shi Mengwan thought of the table he had moved back earlier. The doctor told you not to carry heavy things. Have you forgotten? Don't worry. This injury won't kill me. The young man said this and left. The young man left, but he didn't come back for a long time. When night fell, Shi Mengwan wasn't waiting for him anymore. It was just that she didn't feel safe at home alone. There was only one door in this bungalow. There wasn't even an extra security door outside. It wasn't like when she was in town, where her neighbors were all close to her. It didn't matter. She hadn't seen anyone living next door in the past few days. What she didn't know was that this place was very close to a development zone in Lin City. This was an old city area. Most of the locals weren't willing to live here anymore. They were all rented to foreign workers. The people who lived here all went to work during the day, and the workers all had their own things to do. After returning home, they would be tired for a day. Who would be happy to meddle in other people's business? This was also the reason why no one came to help Shi Mengwan when she was chased by two people last time. Shi Mengwan curled up on the small sofa and stared at the door. She didn't dare to sleep. She didn't know where Qiao Zhe had gone and why he wasn't back yet. She got up and looked at the time again. The old alarm clock was already pointing at 11:30. The weather didn't seem to be good today. She heard the sound of rain hitting the window. The voice came again and again, making her more and more anxious. After all, she was only 12 years old. She ran away from home alone to Lin City. That young man, even though she clearly wasn't familiar with him, even though the young man looked vicious. But he was here, at least it wouldn't be so empty. She turned around again, but she still couldn't sleep. The rain outside seemed to be getting heavier and heavier. She couldn't sleep anymore, so she simply got up and wrapped herself in a blanket. She curled up and sat on the sofa. It was at this moment that the door opened. She was startled by the sound of the door opening and almost jumped up. It was at this moment that the young man pushed the door open and entered. The young man's clothes were wet, and his hair was also wet. The soles of his shoes were stained with mud, and he looked a little disheveled. Seeing that Shi Mengwan was still awake, the young man was stunned. "You're not asleep yet." Shi Mengwan was too embarrassed to say that she was timid. She was afraid that she wouldn't be able to sleep. "Where did you go? Why are you back so late? You're long-winded." The young man shook the water off his hair and went to his room. Shi Mengwan got up and followed behind him. Why are you all wet?" And the young man replied casually. He was about to take off the wet clothes on his body. Suddenly, he turned around and looked at Shi Mengwan. "There should still be ingredients in the kitchen, right?" "Yes." "Are you hungry?" "And, cook a bowl of noodles for me." The young man looked at Shi Mengwan. "Cook more. I'm going to take a shower." His tone of command didn't arouse the slightest dissatisfaction or resistance from Shi Mengwan. He was back. There was one more person here, so she didn't have to be so afraid anymore. She turned around and went to the kitchen. Cooking couldn't be any easier for her. The moment she took out the noodles, she thought of the young man's overly thin body. After thinking for a moment, she took out an egg and the remaining tomatoes that the young man had bought earlier. She took 20 minutes to cook the tomato and egg noodles. She took it out and placed it on the small table outside. The young man had just taken a shower. As soon as he came out, he smelled the fragrance of the noodles. He glanced at Shi Mengwan. Without saying anything, he sat down and picked up the noodles to eat. When he picked up the chopsticks, he realized something and glanced at Shi Mengwan. "You're not eating." "No need. Go ahead and eat." Shi Mengwan shook his head. She had already brushed her teeth. She was a bit of a neat freak. After brushing her teeth, she refused to eat again. When the youth heard this, he didn't care about her anymore. Shi Mengwan could go to sleep now. "I'm going to sleep. When you're done eating, put the bowl in the sink. I'll wash it tomorrow." Long-winded, the youngster replied without raising his head while eating the noodles. Shi Mengwan's expression didn't look good. How was she long-winded? She ignored the young man and went straight to the sofa to sleep. The moment she closed her eyes, she thought, "I don't seem to be that good at cooking, right?" Why did the youth eat so happily every time? He wondered what kind of life he had led in the past. She was curious about the young man. But at this time, she knew that she couldn't get anything out of him. The sound of the bowl being placed on the table brought Shi Mengwan back to her senses. Only then did she realize that Zhang Haoze had already finished eating the noodles and was staring at her. She retracted her gaze and returned to the kitchen without another word. The materials were already made, and her movements were fast, so it was not complicated to make. He cooked another bowl of noodles for himself. However, he realized that he didn't have much appetite. In that year, how many times had she cooked for her dear brother? How many times had she cooked noodles? However, she realized that her dear brother's favorite was still tomato and egg noodles. Even though her cooking methods didn't seem like those of a chef, and were even a little weird, Xiao Zhe still liked them very much. For example, no one would cut up the vegetables and put them into the noodles when cooking noodles. Another example, she always liked to cut the tomatoes into small pieces. It wasn't like the ones in restaurants outside where the tomatoes were sliced. In the past, Su Qingsang had laughed at her and said that no one cooked tomato and egg noodles like her. She retaliated and said that this was her own creation. Was that okay? Fortunately, Su Qingsang wasn't good at cooking, but she wasn't picky. Whenever the two sisters had a gathering, she would eat whatever he cooked. Just like her dear brother, no matter what she cooked or how she cooked, he would eat the same. And when she looked at Jean Hausa just now, she thought of her dear brother. Although one of them looked a little rough when he wolfed down the food, and the other looked slow and elegant. However, she really saw the similarities between the two of them. For example, whether it was her dear brother or Jean Hausa, they both liked to pick up the noodles first. After picking up the noodles with his chopsticks, they didn't eat it. Instead, they drank a mouthful of the soup and the noodles. Also, Jean Hausa's way of holding the chopsticks was the same as her dear brother's. A normal person would hold the chopsticks horizontally. However, Jean Hausa's fingers were especially long. When he held the chopsticks, the angle was a little lower than the average person's. It looked like he was holding it crooked. After confirming once again that Jean Hausa was her dear brother and finding the similarities between the two of them, Shi Mengwan wasn't happy at all. Her dear brother had long forgotten about her. She looked at the bowl of noodles and had no appetite, but she forced herself to carry it out. She was stunned when she didn't see Jean Hausa. She was so distracted that she didn't hear the sound of the door closing. She thought that Jean Hausa had already left. She couldn't tell if she was disappointed or something else. She only felt that her entire heart was empty. That feeling returned to when she was 13 years old, when she lost her dear brother. After casually eating a few mouthfuls of noodles, Shi Mengwan wasn't in the mood to continue. She put away the bowls and tidied up the kitchen again. She was obviously extremely tired, but she didn't want to sleep at all. She simply mopped the kitchen and living room floors. After she was done being tired and busy, Shi Mengwan returned to her room. The moment she entered the door, she was shocked. The person she thought had left was actually sitting on the bed in her room. Shi Mengwan stood at the door, looked at Jean Hausa, and then looked in the direction of the door. You didn't leave. She looked at Jean Hausa. He had already taken off his suit jacket and vest. He was only wearing a shirt inside. At this moment, two of the buttons on his shirt were undone, and his sleeves were casually rolled up to his elbows. The stray hair on his forehead hung down, and his leopard-like eyes were still sharp. Especially when he was still sitting on the bed, his slender legs casually folded together. Besides being handsome, he also looked a little lazy. The words she wanted to chase him away were stuck in her throat, and she couldn't say a word. She didn't know before, but now she realized that it wasn't just women who misled people. It was the same for men. It took her a few seconds to find her voice, and Shi Mengwan took a step back. Looking at the enlarged face in front of her, she couldn't find her voice for a long time. She pinched her fingernails into her palms and reminded herself that the person in front of her wasn't her dear brother. She couldn't be entangled with him anymore. Mr. Jean, it's getting late. Please leave. Her order to leave made Jean Hausa stand up. The room was only that big, so he easily walked in front of her. Shi Mengwan thought that he was going to leave, so she took another step back twice. She signaled that he could leave. However, Jean Hausa suddenly placed a hand on the wall behind her. Shi Mingwan's back was pressed tightly against the wall, and she didn't dare to move. "What did you call me?" Jean Hausa slowly moved his face closer. His breath pointed at her face. Shi Mingwan felt uncomfortable. She didn't know what kind of madness he was going through. Since he didn't admit that he was her dear brother and had a fiancé, then she should keep a distance from him. "Mr. Jean. It's getting late. Please, woo-woo." Her lips were kissed by someone, and the man's minty scent assaulted her face. Behind her was the cold wall, and in front of her was his hot chest. In one day, she had experienced the same scene twice. She didn't understand what Jean Hausa was thinking. All of her consciousness was confused by this domineering kiss. She thought of the way Jean Hausa ate noodles, and the way her dear brother ate noodles. She thought of the way Jean Hausa sat on her bed with his legs folded, and then she thought of the way her dear brother sat on the sofa in the small bungalow. The two faces of youth and maturity overlapped in front of her. She couldn't escape from Jean Hausa's kiss. She even forgot how she resisted Jean Hausa in the hotel. Or perhaps at that time, she had to worry about someone passing by, but now she didn't have to worry. The kiss slowly changed, and Jean Hausa's hands began to move around her body. Perhaps it was because the temperature in the room wasn't low, but she actually felt that his hands were a little hot. Her consciousness became more and more blurry. The only remaining string of reason told her that this was wrong. She couldn't do this. However, when Jean Hausa's hand reached into her clothes, that kind of reason completely collapsed. She was utterly defeated in front of him and retreated step by step. She didn't know when her body arrived on the bed. She didn't know when her clothes fell to the ground. She only remembered feeling Jean Hausa's kiss, Jean Hausa's touch, and the feeling Jean Hausa gave her. Although it wasn't rough, it wasn't as urgent as last time. However, it couldn't be said to be very gentle. Although she tried her best to restrain herself, it still carried a barbaric, almost plundering attack. When she merged with him, her mind went blank, and the only thought left was dear brother. Dear brother, she whispered those 3 words softly, but it made Jean Hausa's eyes become deeper and gloomier. He kissed her lips, but felt that it wasn't enough. He increased his strength and smashed her into pieces. Naturally, that voice couldn't come out anymore. Everything would come to an end. When everything returned to calm, Shi Mingwan's remaining rationality finally began to return. She suddenly realized what she had done. What did Jean Hausa do? She turned to look at him. The person was lying on the bed, looking at the ceiling above his head. His breathing was a little heavy. There was only the sound of the two of them breathing in the room. Shi Mingwan turned her face away. Her body was tired, but her heart was even more tired. What were they doing? What did he take her for? She turned over and slowly curled up. She was very tired. She needed to sleep now. Her body was carried into someone's arms. She tried to struggle, but she didn't have the strength. Moreover, struggling at this time was actually very laughable. They had just done everything they could and couldn't do. Wasn't it too late to struggle now? Shi Mingwan felt that she was being unreasonable, but now she was really being unreasonable. Don't touch me. Don't come again. She had no strength left. Didn't he know his limits just now? Jean Hausa didn't do anything to her. He just hugged her into his arms, and his arms were a little tight. Jean Hausa. Let go of me. Shi Mingwan's back was tightly pressed against his chest. The two of them were in an extremely intimate position at this moment. She didn't like such intimacy, or perhaps she wasn't used to it. I'm going to take a shower. Seeing that he had no intention of letting go of her, she had no choice but to pull his arm. I said let go of me. I'm going to take a shower. Jean Hauser didn't let go of her. Instead, he turned her body around. The resistance on her face was too obvious. It was so obvious that Jean Hauser didn't understand what she was resisting. He kissed her lips again. Sure, Mengwan really felt tired. She didn't understand how he did it, but she couldn't ask. Because Jean Hauser started again. Just when she wanted to regain her senses and draw a clear line between them, he started a new round of plundering. This time, she didn't even have a place to escape. Sure, Mengwan couldn't sleep. She couldn't sleep. After 3 rounds of sex and entanglement with Jean Hauser, she was the same as last time. She should have been extremely tired, but now, she was full of energy. She looked at the ceiling above her head and didn't quite understand how things had turned out like this. Her gaze fell on Jean Hauser's face. What was he thinking? Why could he have sex with her while being affectionate with his girlfriend? She had never seen them get along, but she felt that she didn't need to see it. Just based on the fact that Chen Feifei had been holding Jean Hauser's hand just now. She knew. In places that she didn't see, the two of them were definitely intimate. But why? Chapter 659. Shi Mengwan never knew that one day, she would fall into such a situation. She had once fantasized that if one day, she met her dear brother and she found him, what would happen to her? Ever since she separated from her dear brother at the age of 13, she had often thought about it. Sometimes, his heart ached just thinking about it. When she couldn't find Big Brother, she felt lost and lost. But now that he had found the person, he felt even worse. She was upset that her dear brother had forgotten about her and that he was treating her with such an attitude now. However, she hated herself even more. For the sake of that little bit of hope from before. He had put himself in such an awkward situation. Her gaze fell on Jean Hauser's face, only to find that he had opened his eyes. Seeing that she was staring at him, he reached out and pulled her waist into his arms. Their bodies were pressed together again. Shi Mengwan wasn't used to this kind of intimacy. Don't move. Jean Hauser put his hand on her waist to prevent her from making a sound. It seems that you don't want to sleep. If that's the case, his hand slowly moved down from the back of her waist. Shi Mengwan was shocked and quickly grabbed his hand. Don't do anything rash. Even she herself felt that her words were not imposing at all. If he wanted to mess around, he would have done it long ago. Why would he care about this? She lowered her head and saw Jean Hauser's chest. She turned her face away uncomfortably. I'm sleepy. I want to sleep. She tried to turn her back on him, but he wouldn't give her the chance. He pulled her body into his arms again. He lowered his head and looked at the flash of resistance in her eyes. Let's sleep like this. Shi Mengwan became more and more uncomfortable. How could she fall asleep like this? If you don't sleep, I'll continue. His hand rested on her waist again. Jean Hauser threatened again. Shi Mengwan seemed to be frightened and quickly closed her eyes. Her eyes were closed tightly, and her long and thick eyelashes were trembling slightly. Jean Hauser's eyes darkened. The hand that wasn't on Shi Mengwan's waist trembled slightly. He raised it as if he was about to touch her face, but then he put it down again. He closed his eyes and did not look at her again. Shi Mengwan couldn't fall asleep. Her mind was in a mess. She was rarely at a loss like this. Jean Hauser's chest was burning, and his hands on his waist were firm and strong. She couldn't break free, but she was afraid that he would really do it again. She closed her eyes and forced herself not to look at him. She thought that she wouldn't be able to fall asleep, but she fell asleep again in a daze. The dream came without warning, and Shi Mengwan saw her 12-year-old self again. She had been with Xiao Zhe for more than a month. After more than a month, she had more or less familiarized herself with her surroundings. Sometimes she would go out during the day to look around, but she would not go too far and would come back again. She found a very old bookstore at the end of the alley. Then she had something to do. Xiao Zhe's residence didn't have a TV or other electronic products. At that time, there were already cell phones. However, it was impossible for people like Xiao Zhe and her to afford cell phones and communication products. Shi Mengwan had nothing to do, so she went to the bookstore to borrow books every day. There weren't many books in the bookstore, but she liked to go there. At least she could pass the time. However, Xiao Zhe went out every day. He seemed to be very busy. Especially after the injury on his hand healed, he went out early and returned late every day. Sometimes, he would come back for dinner, but after dinner, he would run out again. She asked him what he was doing, but he told her not to worry about it. After a long time, she didn't ask anymore. Like Xiao Zhe's sister, she cleaned up the house, cooked, and washed clothes for him every day. However, after she stayed at Xiao Zhe's place for more than a month, the weather in Lin City entered late autumn. Lin City was located in the south, and the weather was extreme. In such a season, the temperature difference was huge. It was fine during the day. She only wore long sleeves, so she didn't feel cold. But at night, a blanket really couldn't warm her up. She felt cold. When it turned cold on the first day, she could still endure it. The next day, there was an autumn rain. She was extremely cold. She curled up on the sofa and looked at Xiao Zhe's room with a conflicted expression. She had stayed at Xiao Zhe's place for more than a month, so she naturally knew that the young man's house only had a blanket and nothing else. She didn't know where the young man got the money from during this period of time, but he had enough to eat and buy clothes for her. But she wasn't sure if her dear brother would agree to buy a blanket. She was so cold that she felt uncomfortable. She tossed and turned on the sofa for a long time, but she couldn't fall asleep. "What are you doing?" Her movements were so loud that even Xiao Zhe, who was inside, was disturbed by her. He got up and looked at Shi Mengwan, who was sleeping on the sofa. His face was full of unhappiness. Shi Mengwan got up and wrapped herself tightly with the blanket. She looked at the young man timidly. "I'm cold." She was too embarrassed to continue. She originally wanted to take care of Xiao Zhe until his hand recovered and then go home. She thought about how she quarreled with her grandmother and how her family was like that. If she went back and her parents didn't change their mind and still wanted to send her sister away, she would rather not go back. But after staying for more than a month, although Xiao Zhe sometimes looked fierce, he treated her well. Xiao Zhe treated her well, but she was a little embarrassed. He saved her from being bullied. She stayed to repay him for saving her life. But now, she wanted him to raise her. Now, she even wanted him to buy her a blanket. A 12-year-old girl was very thin-skinned. If it wasn't for the fact that it was really cold, she would be too embarrassed to say anything. Xiao Zhe glanced at her, then looked at the sofa. "Go sleep on the bed." "What about you?" Shi Mengwan bit her lip and looked at the sofa. He was much taller than her. How could he sleep on such a sofa? Xiao Zhe didn't say anything and gestured for her to get up. He pulled the blanket over and lay down on the sofa. When he really fell asleep, Shi Mengwan realized that Xiao Zhe really couldn't sleep. He was already 1.7 meters tall. He couldn't even put his feet down when he slept on the sofa. Not to mention that the small blanket couldn't cover him. "Dear brother, go to sleep." Xiao Zhe closed his eyes as if he was going to sleep just like that. Shi Mengwan bit her lip. She didn't enter the room. She looked at Xiao Zhe and then at the bed. In the end, her hands clenched tightly into fists. Dear brother. Why didn't you sleep on the bed too? The weather was getting colder and colder. She couldn't let Xiao Zhe sleep on the sofa outside. If this continued, he would definitely catch a cold. When Xiao Zhe heard this, he opened his eyes and looked at her. You want to sleep with me? Shi Mengwan was a little embarrassed. In the end, she nodded. Dear brother, I believe in you. Xiao Zhe stared at her face and finally sat up. Shi Mengwan entered the room, and Xiao Zhe followed her in. He lay down on the bed. Shi Mengwan stood there, feeling a little awkward. After Xiao Zhe fell asleep, he pulled the blanket over himself and closed his eyes to sleep. After waiting for a while, he didn't see Shi Mengwan come up to sleep, so he opened his eyes again. He looked at Shi Mengwan and found that she was standing there motionlessly, a little at a loss for what to do. Aren't you sleepy? Sleepy? How could she not be sleepy? But no matter how sleepy she was still a girl. Just now, she was just impulsive. She was afraid that dear brother wouldn't sleep well and would catch a cold, so she asked him to sleep on the bed too. Now that she had calmed down, Shi Mengwan felt awkward. Then go to sleep. Xiao Zhe ran outside every day during the day, so he exercised a lot every day. Now, he was sleepy and wanted to sleep. Before he closed his eyes, he glanced at Shi Mengwan again. Don't worry, I'm not interested in your shriveled body. Shi Mengwan was still a little girl. When had she ever heard such words? Her face was burning fiercely. She was blushing and embarrassed. But what Xiao Zhe said was the truth. She was only 12 years old this year and hadn't developed yet. She was just a little girl. She got on the bed and slept an arm's length away from Xiao Zhe. She covered her body with the blanket. Covering herself with a blanket was completely different from covering herself with a blanket. She finally felt that she wasn't cold anymore. Because she wasn't cold anymore, her complexion was much better. With someone sleeping beside her, she thought that she wouldn't be able to sleep. But she was really sleepy. Slowly, she actually fell asleep. When Shi Mengwan woke up in the morning, she realized that she was sleeping with Xiao Zhe. The young man's sleeping posture was quite casual. One of his feet was already outside the blanket, and the other was still under the blanket. His slender arm was placed on her shoulder just like that. Shi Mengwan looked at that hand and then at the young man's sleeping face. She confirmed that the young man didn't mean it. She uncomfortably stepped back, wanting to avoid the young man's hand. But the bed was only so big, so where could she avoid it? She could only take the young man's hand away, but the young man opened his eyes at this moment. Her hand was still holding his hand, and she suddenly met the young man's dark and deep gaze. Shi Mengwan was shocked and quickly let go of her hand. Xiao Zhe's hand dropped again and hit her shoulder. She felt the pain, and her face instantly changed color. What are you doing? The young man stood up. His duck-like voice sounded a little hoarse in the morning, and it was even more unpleasant to hear. Nothing. Shi Mengwan quickly got up. I'm just asking you what you're eating for breakfast. Anything. There was no need to ask about such things. Shi Mengwan had always made her own decisions. Shi Mengwan hadn't lived with her parents since she was young. Because her parents had given birth to a girl, she wasn't close to her cousins at home. This was the first time she had slept in the same bed with a boy, and it was a boy she had not known for long. The young man only felt that she was strange. How could he have thought of her young girl's thoughts? Shi Mengwan had lived with the young man for a few days before she realized that in the young man's heart, there was no difference between men and women. Every day, he slept as he should and did as he should. He still took good care of Shi Mengwan. However, she slowly came to her senses. Perhaps in the young man's heart at that time, he only treated her as a little brother or a little sister. He was very busy. She didn't even know why he was so busy. What she could be sure of was that the young man was definitely not studying. She knew that other people's children should be in school at the age of 15. They were either in their first or second year of high school. However, the young man wasn't in school. She had asked a few times, but Xiao Zhe said he wasn't. She didn't ask anymore. Her relationship with the young man had always been like this. She treated the young man as a big brother, and the young man treated her as a little sister. If the young man hadn't bought the wrong bowl of glutinous rice balls that day and bought them home as glutinous rice balls, their relationship might have always been that of a big brother and a little sister, right? Shi Mengwan woke up from her sleep and realized that she had slept until noon again. She blinked her eyes and seemed to have spent some effort to realize where she was and what had happened. She looked at the other side of the bed, but it was already empty. Jean Hauze had already left. She sat up and the blanket slid down. The marks on her body were no longer covered. Shi Mengwan pursed her lips into a straight line. She bit her lip and thought of Jean Hauze's frivolous behavior last night, and of her obedience without any resistance. She suddenly felt as if there was a thorn in her heart. She curled up her body and pulled up the blanket to cover herself. She looked at an unknown point, and her mood became gloomy bit by bit. Today was Su Qingsang's birthday. Su Qingsang's birthday was also very interesting. It was the day after Christmas. In the past, Su Qingsang and Shi Mengwan would always be together. The two sisters would have a meal together on Su Qingsang's birthday. They would celebrate her birthday together. Su Qingsang was an illegitimate daughter. In the past, no one in the Su family would remember her birthday, and no one would specially celebrate her birthday. Every year, she would ask Su Qingsang to come to her apartment and cook a bowl of longevity noodles for her. This year was different. Su Qingsang was married. Shi Mengwan believed that Hu Jinyao would definitely be prepared. On Christmas Day, Shi Mengwan spent it with the employees of the studio. It was the end of the year. Although there were many things to do, she was not an unreasonable boss. She treated the employees to a meal and accompanied them to karaoke, which was very rare. After a night of fooling around, she remembered the next day that she had an appointment with 2 clients that day. Shi Mengwan had already ordered a cake, but the client was particularly difficult to deal with. After Shi Mengwan sent the client away, she went to take the cake and rushed to the place where Su Qingsang was celebrating her birthday. Only then did she realize that something was wrong. Su Qingsang had acknowledged her mother, and Xiang Kaiping was also there. But this time, not only Xiang Kaiping, but also Su Qinghui, was there for her birthday. Shi Mengwan looked at Su Qingsang and then at Su Qinghui. The calmest person among them was Hu Jinyao, as if nothing had happened. Shi Mengwan looked at him for a few minutes and realized that Su Qinghui probably felt guilty towards Xiang Kaiping because Xiang Kaiping didn't like him. She looked at Su Qinghui and felt strange. She had to admit that a woman's intuition was quite accurate. In Shi Mengwan's heart, Su Qinghui was the representative of a scumbag. He had a wife, but also an old lover. Not only did he have an old lover, but he also had an illegitimate daughter. In the past, he had ignored this illegitimate daughter for so many years. When his old lover came back, he started to care about this illegitimate daughter again. No matter how she looked at it, it was strange. She felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't tell why. Seeing that Xiang Kaiping was unhappy, she used her usual talent and laughed in front of her. Finally, Xiang Kaiping had a smile on her face. After the party, Shi Mengwan was a little worried about Su Qingsang. However, when she saw the protective look on Hua Jinyao's face, she felt relieved again. A faint envy surged in her heart. No matter how difficult Su Qingsang had been in the past 20 years, at least she was happy now. After all, Hua Jinyao was really good to her. After saying goodbye to Su Qingsang, Shi Mengwan wasn't in a hurry to go home. It had been more than a week since the last time Zhang Haoze appeared and left. These days, she couldn't help but think of Zhang Haoze. Occasionally, she would ask herself in her heart, why couldn't she let him go? She kept convincing herself to forget Zhang Haoze, the man who came and went as he pleased, but she found that she couldn't do it. She stopped the car in front of the river embankment, got out, and walked along the river embankment. It was winter in Lin City, and the weather was very cold. There weren't many people on the river embankment. Shi Mengwan tightened her coat, walked to a bench, and sat down. Lin City had been developing well in the past few years. There were tall buildings on the other side of the river embankment, and the LED walls outside the buildings were playing all kinds of advertisements. The new year was coming, and the advertisements were very festive and red. However, Shi Mengwan didn't feel the atmosphere of the new year at all. She took out her phone and took a picture of the scenery on the other side of the river. She wanted to post it on WeChat, but in the end, she deleted it. This was the way of the world. Happy things could be shared, but loneliness couldn't be shared with anyone. She put away her phone and planned to go home, feeling a little cold from the cold wind. At that moment, another person sat down on the bench. Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. She turned her face, and the light from the river embankment shone on the person's face. She looked at Zhang Haoze and was stunned for a moment. She was looking at him, and he was looking at her. She couldn't help but look behind her again. There was no one else. It was just him. She didn't know when he came, and how long had he been here. Before she could finish her sentence, Zhang Haoze reached out and hugged her tightly. Shi Mengwan's body froze there. She didn't know what to say. There seemed to be something wrong with Zhang Haoze today. His hands held her tightly in his arms. The night wind blew, and Shi Mengwan should feel cold. But now that she was hugged by him, she didn't feel cold. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. She didn't move, and he didn't move either. Until she seemed to hear someone approaching and walking in this direction. She tried to retreat from Zhang Haoze's arms, but he hugged her very tightly. She was helpless. When someone approached, she buried her face in his chest. Inexplicably, she didn't want others to see her with Zhang Haoze. The footsteps approached. The person might have just passed by here at night, but he quickly left. She could hear the footsteps approaching, and they seemed to have stopped for a moment. She didn't know that the people who passed by were two girls. When they saw Zhang Haoze's appearance, even though they didn't see it clearly, they were still stunned by Zhang Haoze. One of the two girls even wanted to secretly take out her phone to take a picture of Zhang Haoze, but she was defeated by Zhang Haoze's gloomy gaze. As his footsteps left, Zhang Haoze's hand loosened a little. Shi Mengwan looked up from his arms and met his deep eyes. There were many emotions in those eyes. Shi Mengwan couldn't see them clearly for a moment. She wanted to see them clearly, but she found that Zhang Haoze's gaze made her sink into it. Their eyes met, and her eyes were filled with his shadow. Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes slightly. He suddenly approached her, pressed a hand on the back of her head, and kissed her lips forcefully. His lips were cold, and so was hers. In this weather, the temperature of their bodies wouldn't be too high. However, after their slightly cold lips met, she began to feel hot. She blinked her eyes. Zhang Haoze's face in front of her made her a little intoxicated. She couldn't help but reach out her hand to hold his face, as if she wanted to see his face more clearly. There was a pair of hands on her eyes. Jean Hauser covered her eyes and deepened the kiss. His embrace slowly warmed her. Shi Mengwan, who had felt lonely before, decided not to think about anything for a moment. Just like that, she was hugged and kissed by him. She couldn't see his face, and the feeling in the darkness was especially clear. His kiss was so domineering, and all her feelings were focused on that one spot. She even unconsciously responded to him. And that kind of response made him deepen the kiss. Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. She realized what she had done and went back to pull Jean Hauser's hand. However, he let go of her at this moment and hugged her tightly instead. Her face was on his shoulder, so she couldn't see his expression. Her hands hung by her side. For a moment, she wanted to hug him back, but she forced herself to put them down. He suddenly got up and before she could react, he brought her out of the river embankment. Shi Mengwan could only follow his footsteps and reach the place where she parked her car. Only now did she know that Jean Hauser might have been following her just now. She didn't get into the car. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and stood in front of the car and looked at him. Jean Hauser, what exactly do you want? She didn't call him Mr. Jean anymore. At this time, that form of address was really too pretentious. Jean Hauser stood in front of the car and didn't speak. Shi Mengwan took a deep breath and told herself not to be angry, not to be angry. Jean Hauser, can you tell me what exactly you want? She didn't want to be like this anymore. It's not the first time. You can come and go as you please. You can even do it if you want. Her words were a little vulgar, but they were the truest thoughts in her heart at this moment. I'm not a prostitute. Jean Hauser. She was a woman, an ordinary woman. She longed for love, but the premise was that the person who gave her love was her dear brother. She was a stubborn person. Since she had decided on her dear brother, she wouldn't change her mind. If you weren't my dear brother, please stay away from me. Okay. She couldn't play his game, and she couldn't be like him, disappearing after having sex with her. He didn't even leave a word. But when he appeared again, he pretended as if nothing had happened and took advantage of her. Jean Hauser. Please stay away from me. Her tone was very serious and sincere. She had long realized that she was always weak in front of Jean Hauser. She didn't like such weakness, and she wanted to change this. Goodbye. After saying this, she took out the car keys from her coat. When she wanted to get into the car, Jean Hauser took her car keys and got into the driver's seat. Jean Hauser, what did he mean? Get in the car. Jean Hauser's voice was indifferent. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth and stood at the door of the car without moving. Get out of the car. Get in the car. Chapter 660. She didn't move, and neither did Jean Hauser. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth. The cold wind gave her a headache. In the end, she could only go around to the other side of the car and get in. She didn't speak. She turned her back to Jean Hauser and didn't look at him. She just looked at the scenery outside the car window. This was the direction of her home. After Shi Mengwan saw it clearly, she couldn't help but call out. Stop. As soon as she asked him to stop, Jean Hauser really stopped. She turned to look at Jean Hauser, wanting him to get out of the car. However, before she could say anything, Jean Hauser actually got out of the car. This time, it was Shi Mengwan's turn to be shocked. Was Jean Hauser so easy to talk to? She was a little suspicious and couldn't help but glance at Jean Hauser. Her gaze followed Jean Hauser outside the car. She found that Jean Hauser had gone to a convenience store nearby. Shi Mengwan glanced in that direction, then wanted to sit in the driver's seat and drive away. However, she found that Jean Hauser had actually pulled out the key. She could only sit there without moving and look at John Hauser, not understanding what he was thinking. John Hauser soon came out, and he seemed to be carrying a bag in his hand. He got into the car, threw the bag on the back seat, and started the car again. Shi Mengwan couldn't help but look back. Unfortunately, it was too dark in the car, so she couldn't see clearly. She looked at John Hauser's face again. John Hauser. She bit her lip and seemed to be organizing her words in her mind. I admit that I treated you as someone else. She turned her face away, unable to continue. What did she say? She said that she did not treat him as someone else, that he was the person in her heart. From the age of 12 to the age of 25, for the past 13 years, she had been thinking about him every single day. But now, she had to force herself to tell him that she only thought of him as someone else. Jean Hauser glanced at her with a gloomy gaze. But he went back to driving seriously. It wasn't too far from her apartment, so it wouldn't take long for them to arrive. The car stopped and Shi Mengwan got out of the car. Jean Hauser got out of the car and took the bag from the back of the car seat. Shi Mengwan reached out to take the key from Jean Hauser's hand, but he had already stepped into the car. It was only then that Shi Mengwan saw clearly what was in the bag in his hand. Although only a corner was revealed, it was enough for her to see it clearly. Looking at the boxes of ultra-thin Okamoto, she blushed and quickly followed Jean Hauser. You, Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser walked quickly. He entered the apartment building in a few steps and pressed the button for the elevator. Jean Hauser. Can we talk? Shi Mengwan bit her lip. She still wanted to say something, but the elevator came down and someone came out. When he saw Jean Hauser and the other man, he took another look at them. The combination of a handsome man and a beautiful woman was always more eye-catching. Shi Mengwan couldn't say anything else. She lowered her head and stood a step behind Jean Hauser. The man had left. Jean Hauser entered the elevator. Shi Mengwan stood there without moving for a long time. Outside the elevator, Jean Hauser and she looked at each other. The last person to admit defeat was Shi Mengwan. She stood in. She felt powerless. This feeling of helplessness made her not in the mood to speak until she entered the house. The moment she entered the door, she stood at the door and looked at Jean Hauser, who seemed to have entered an uninhabited land. Jean Hauser. Let's have a good talk. Okay. Jean Hauser casually placed the bag in his hand on the coffee table, then walked to her and stood in front of her. Shi Mengwan closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was a hint of determination in her beautiful almond-shaped eyes. I'm sorry, I said it just now. I treated you as someone else. Maybe my behavior wasn't appropriate and made you misunderstand. I apologize to you. I hope you understand that I'm not a prostitute, and I'm not a very casual woman. Shi Mengwan didn't want to continue pestering him. She would rather lower her stance first. She didn't quite understand what Jean Hauser was thinking. No matter what, she felt that the way the two of them got along wasn't normal. Every time they met, they would have sex, and after sleeping, they would split their things. She thought that if she said this, he would understand. She looked up at Jean Hauser and found that he was standing still. Jean Hauser. Are you done? She didn't express herself clearly. What I mean is, Jean Hauser, this is my home, my place. I hope you can leave this place now. Jean Hauser looked at her face, which obviously wanted to chase him away, and took a step forward. Shi Mengwan's back leaned against the door. She was 1.7 meters tall, but in front of Jean Hauser, who was 1.8 meters tall, she wasn't tall enough. She raised her head and looked at him. Jean Hauser, it's getting late. Please, a kiss landed on her lips. Shi Mengwan quickly reacted after a momentary daze. She struggled with all her might, and her movements were more intense than before. Jean Hause had no choice but to stop because of her interference. However, he didn't let go of her. Instead, he placed his hands on both sides of her body. Jean Hause. Shi Mengwan felt that she had already made her words very clear. I've already said it. I just treat you as someone else. Her lips were pressed against his again. He was grinding against her lips with a force that made her feel pain. Woo-woo. She looked at him with a cold gaze. He was also looking at her, not giving in at all. It was almost a stalemate. She felt pain and opened her mouth to bite him. He retreated and took her again. In the end, Shi Mengwan was the first to lose. She was panting and her legs were weak. She almost couldn't stand. His big hand was on her waist. He wrapped her in his arms and didn't let her fall from his arms to the ground. Jean, after kissing for too long, her voice felt a little hoarse. She swallowed her saliva. Jean House's hand caressed her captivating red lips. His slightly cold fingertips gently brushed past, causing Shi Mengwan's body to tremble uncontrollably. You treat me as someone else. Jean Hause moved closer to her, his hand still on her lips. He narrowed his eyes and stared at her face. Yes. Shi Mengwan nodded. She looked away and didn't look at Jean House's face. I treated you as someone else. Now I know that you're not, so let's just leave it at that. You want to end it? Jean House's voice was low. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and nodded again. She didn't speak, and Jean Hause didn't speak either. The room was very quiet. The air conditioner wasn't turned on. Shi Mengwan had been leaning against the door and felt a little cold. She subconsciously twisted her body. Her waist tightened, and Jean Hause once again pulled her into his arms. He suddenly moved closer, and the distance between their faces was less than a centimeter. Treat me as someone else? He asked again. Yes. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth and turned to look at him with a firm gaze. She saw the corners of Jean House's lips curl up slightly. His forehead pressed against hers. If that's the case, then why don't you continue being someone else? Shi Mengwan was speechless. She didn't know what she could answer. The moment Jean Hause was about to pick her up, she realized that something was wrong. No, don't. No way. Why? Jean Hause stopped for a moment, still staring at her face. Anyway, no way. Shi Mengwan pressed her hands against his chest. Her mind couldn't think very fast at this moment. His aura, his embrace, and his kiss would make her unable to think. You have a fiancé. Yes, that was the reason. As if she had an idea, she suddenly raised her head and looked at Jean Hause. You already have a fiancé. You can't do this. Jean House's reaction was to pick her up forcefully and bring her into the room. Jean Hause. I don't have a fiancé. Shen, he didn't give her a chance to ask. He kissed her lips. When he passed by the coffee table, he gently hooked his pinky finger and picked up the bag of condoms. Shi Mengwan felt cold when she slept until midnight. She turned over and instinctively moved her body closer to the heat source. She felt like she was surrounded by someone. The warm chest made her no longer feel cold. She almost sighed as she pressed her face against the heat source. This pillow was really comfortable to hug. Shi Mengwan rubbed her face against the pillow, but she felt that something was wrong. It was firm and warm, broad and strong. This wasn't the touch of a pillow. She suddenly opened her eyes. What she saw was a piece of wheat-colored skin. She could even see two thin scratches on it. She had left them yesterday. Realizing this, she instinctively took a step back. The hand on her back made it impossible for her to retreat. She looked up and saw Jean House's enlarged face in front of her. She panicked for some reason and started to pull his hand. She clearly wanted to make things clear with Jean House yesterday, but in the end, the two of them rolled together again. This wasn't what she wanted. Shi Mengwan felt a headache coming on. Jean House's hand was taken away by her, but in the next second, it landed on her shoulder. Her body was pressed back, and her body was suppressed by someone. The man had woken up at some point. He was lying on top of her and staring at her face with a burning gaze. "Let go of me." Seeing that he didn't let go of her, Shi Mengwan looked up at him. "Jean House, why aren't you leaving? Do you think I'm that kind of casual woman?" Seeing that Jean House's brows furrowed, she reached out to push him again. "Jean House, don't you mind if I think you're another man? I already answered this question yesterday." As Jean House spoke, he lowered his head and bit her shoulder. The force wasn't strong, but it made her feel a little pain. "You." Shi Mengwan was furious and spoke without thinking. "What kind of woman do you want? Let's not talk about others. Chen Feifei is your girlfriend, right? Aren't you afraid that she'll be unhappy if you know what you're doing to me here?" Jean House stopped for a moment. There was a flash of darkness in his eyes. "Don't mention her. What happened between them had nothing to do with Chen Feifei. I don't want to mention her either." Shi Mengwan's emotions were complicated. "But the problem is, she's your girlfriend, isn't she?" Jean House's face moved closer to her. "Do you mind?" "I mind." Shi Mengwan looked at his face and didn't want to say that she minded very much. "But this isn't because I have deep feelings for you, but because I don't want to be a mistress." No woman would like to be a mistress, and she was no exception. Jean House stared at her face for a long time and finally said, "She has heart disease." This could be considered an explanation. After saying that, he lowered his head and kissed her shoulder again. Shi Mengwan, however, heard a different answer at this time. So that was how it was. Chen Feifei had heart disease. Perhaps she couldn't exercise vigorously. What about Jean House? The two of them had done it so many times, so she could understand that his desire was very strong. Her health wasn't bad, but she begged for mercy under him every time. If Chen Feifei had heart disease, how could she bear it? Her heart felt as if it had been cut by him with a knife, and it hurt dully. She was lying to him when she said that she treated him as someone else. But he really treated her as a prostitute. She was just a substitute that Jean House found because he pitied Chen Feifei. She was a woman who helped him solve his desire. Her heart hurt. It was so painful that even her body's senses became dull. The man didn't notice her absent-mindedness and pain. It was like a sword that split her apart. Then, he pulled it into pieces. She was broken into pieces. From body to heart, she would never be complete again. Time passed by a few more days, and it was New Year's Day. Shi Mengwan's studio also had 3 days off. She originally wanted to go and play with Su Qingsang, but Su Qingsang went to Japan with Xiang Kaiping. Before going, she asked Shi Mengwan if she wanted to go with her. Shi Mengwan knew that this was a trip that Su Qingsang wanted to improve her relationship with Xiang Kaiping, so how could she be so blind? She drove herself back to her home. Compared to the 5 or 6 hours it took to return home 13 years ago, the distance of the repaired highway was shortened by nearly half. It only took Shi Mengwan more than 2 hours to drive home. Shi Mengwan's mother was very happy to see her. As usual, Shi Mengwan bought a lot of things and gave her parents a lot of supplements, as well as some specialties that could only be bought in Lin City. She usually sent them a lot, but it was different to bring them back herself. This time, Shi Mengwan really wanted to stay for 2 more days to celebrate New Year's Day with her family. Although such a new year was not popular in a small place, her parents were very happy to see her. They slaughtered chickens and fish, and her sister, Shi Mingru, was also very happy. They kept surrounding her and calling her sister, asking her to stay for 2 more days. Shi Mengwan agreed, but the plan couldn't keep up with the changes. She had only stayed for a day when she received a call from a client. The other party asked her to rush an urgent letter. That was an old client who had established a good working relationship with Sun Gu since the establishment of the studio. After Shi Mengwan helplessly explained to her parents, she returned to Lin City again under her mother's disappointed gaze. This time, she didn't alarm the other employees. She went straight back to the studio to meet the client. She wrote down all the other parties' requests. Because it was an urgent letter, Shi Mengwan returned to her office and began to prepare to draw. Before she started, she scrolled through her WeChat moments. She saw the pictures Su Qingsang posted, the hot springs in Japan, and the wooden plaques for prayer in Sensoji Temple. She casually clicked like. When she saw the cherry blossom patterns, Shi Mengwan was inspired. When she drew, she always didn't care. Time passed by for a few hours, but she didn't notice. Her phone vibrated a few times, but she didn't notice. The sun was setting, and the lights were on in the room. Shi Mengwan didn't notice that the neon lights were already shining outside. She spent a few hours to make the first draft interesting. Then, she decided on the fabric and the materials needed for the accessories. It was all done. She looked at the manuscript and was very satisfied. Whether it was designing a gown or a wedding dress for the client, most of the time, it was based on the client's ideas. Although that also gave her a sense of accomplishment. But suddenly having her own inspiration like this and drawing a picture that she was very satisfied with made her even happier. She saved the manuscript into the computer, encrypted the information, and saved it. After packing up everything, Shi Mengwan realized that she had been sitting for too long. Her arms and back were a little stiff. Especially her legs, they were extremely numb. She tried to stand up, but she sucked in a breath of cold air. In such a situation, she could only wait for her legs to go numb. Shi Mengwan looked at the time. It was already past 9:00 in the evening. She didn't expect that she would draw for a few hours. Her feet were so numb that she was wondering if she should call for a courier first. However, she heard a sound outside the office. Shi Mengwan was shocked. She looked outside the office and was afraid for a moment. The studio wasn't big, but because this office building was rented to her by one of her clients, the rent was relatively cheaper than outside. The place wasn't particularly big, but because Shi Mengwan paid attention to the privacy of every designer. She specially rented a 2-story space that was high. Every designer was drawing on the 2nd floor. Her office was at the innermost part. Downstairs was the exhibition hall, as well as the reception room. Hearing the noise, Shi Mengwan felt nervous. She suddenly remembered that when she went upstairs to draw, she didn't close the door of the studio. At this time, was the person who came here a thief or someone else? No matter which one it was enough to scare Shi Mengwan. After all, she was the only one here. Her first reaction when she picked up her phone was to call the police. But before calling the police, she should first find a place to hide, right? She heard the sound of footsteps going upstairs, and she became more and more nervous. The place to turn on and off the lights was at the door. She was anxious to turn off the lights and close the door. However, the numbness in her feet still hadn't passed. Waves after waves. Shi Mengwan felt extremely uncomfortable, and she was afraid and anxious. Her back was even covered in a layer of sweat. Seeing that the footsteps were getting closer and closer, she gritted her teeth and stood up, wanting to run to the door. She quickly closed the door before the person came. Shi Mengwan dragged her numb legs around the desk. Just as her hand touched the door, the person outside had already come in. She panicked and instinctively went to close the door. The door was pushed by someone skillfully. She was caught off guard, and her feet were numb. Her body actually fell backwards. She thought that she would fall for sure, but someone was one step faster to support her body. She was stunned for a moment. When she saw Jean House's familiar face, she suddenly exploded. You. She said a few words consecutively. Her feet were so numb that she couldn't stand up. The after effects of fear made her body weak. She gritted her teeth, raised her hand, and punched Jean House's shoulder. B*****. You be*****. Do you know that you scared me to death? You're too much of a B******. You be*****. She didn't know many curse words, so she repeated the word B***** over and over again. She relaxed, and her feet went limp. She was about to slide down again. Jean House quickly picked her up. He placed her on the chair in front of the desk. What's wrong with you? Shi Mengwan couldn't say anything. She just felt terrified. Just now, she really thought that a bad person had come. She lowered her head, and her eyes were a little red. No matter how strong she wasn't a woman. Her heart was beating very fast and anxiously. It took her a few minutes to calm her heart down. She looked up at Jean House and swallowed her saliva. She finally calmed down a little. What are you doing here? If he hadn't suddenly appeared just now, she wouldn't have been so scared. The last time he woke up on her bed, he pressed down on her again, and when she went into the bathroom to take care of herself, he left as quietly as before. She wouldn't be as disappointed as she was the first time. She understood one thing. In Jean House's heart, she was Chen Feifei's substitute. She was just taking on his expectations for Chen Feifei. Was it sad? Was it sad? Was it sad? She felt bad. But no matter how sad or uncomfortable she felt, she was the one who asked for it. She was the one who gave him a chance. But if she did it again, she would probably still make the same choice. She missed her dear brother too much. Even if there was only a sliver of a chance, she would try her best to get close to her dear brother. She looked at Jean House, but she couldn't control her tone. There was a hint of rebuke in it. Jean House looked at her pale face. Are you okay? She didn't seem to be well. I'm fine. Shi Mengwan was no longer afraid, but her expression didn't recover so quickly. You haven't told me yet. Why are you here? I called you, but you didn't answer. He called her. When did that happen? Shi Mengwan's phone was placed on the desk. She reached out and picked it up. There were indeed a few missed calls. However, they were all unfamiliar numbers. She couldn't help but look up at Jean House. Is this your phone number? Yes. Jean House nodded, took her phone, and saved his number. Shi Mengwan looked at his actions and entered his full name. Jean House. It was an extremely unfamiliar title that showed their current relationship. She didn't stop him, but in her heart, she decided to block his number later. Why are you looking for me? I went to your house, but you weren't there. This sentence could be considered an explanation. Shi Mengwan watched him put down his phone. She was sitting, and he was standing. In comparison, he was much taller than her. The pressure was very strong, and she didn't like it. Why did you go to my house again? She tried her best not to sound so resentful. If you want a woman, you can go find a prostitute. No, with your conditions, as long as you wave your hand, there should be many women for you to choose. Isn't that so? Although she didn't understand how Qiao Zhe had become the current Zhang Haoze. She also didn't understand how the dear brother who had nothing back then had become an elite in the business world. But even without these external blessings, just Zhang Haoze's face alone could attract many women, right? Why did he insist on clinging to her? Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes and frowned because of her words. Chapter 661. Zhang Haoze was only relying on her love for him. No matter how spineless she was and how much she loved him, she couldn't stand him treating her like this. Shi Mengwan. Zhang Haoze's voice was a little low. If one looked carefully, they would find that his expression wasn't very good. Shi Mengwan noticed that this seemed to be the first time he called her by her name, and he called her by her full name. Feeling a little sad, she blinked her eyes and suppressed the feeling of wanting to cry. Zhang Haoze, don't tell me you want to say that you don't think of me as a prostitute. Then what are you doing now? Don't tell me you want to say that you like me. Did he think she would believe him? Zhang Haoze didn't like to hear that word from her mouth, but she insisted on saying it twice in a row. After she finished questioning him, Zhang Haoze lowered his head to kiss her. This time, Shi Mengwan made up her mind not to let him have his way. She retreated and used the force to push him away. Zhang Haoze's hands were placed on her shoulders. She pushed him away and his body retreated a little. Zhang Haoze, you can leave. Her feet had already recovered from the numbness. Now, she stood up and tried her best not to lose her aura. Even if she had already lost completely. Zhang Haoze didn't say anything. He just bent down to look at her again and placed his hands on both sides of the armrest of her chair. The scene in front of her was really ambiguous. Shi Mengwan pressed her body tightly against the back and stared at Zhang Haoze warily. She didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything either. He just stared at her. Shi Mengwan was very uncomfortable. She blinked her eyes and was still thinking about how to chase this person away. With a bang, the sudden sound from outside stunned Shi Mengwan for a moment. She turned around and realized that someone was setting off fireworks outside. It was only then that she remembered. Today was New Year's Day. New Year's Day. Although fireworks were prohibited, there were still some people who didn't take these rules seriously. Bang! The fireworks rose into the sky once again. It was extremely bright. When Shi Mengwan rented this place, half of the reason was because the view was good, and there were a few department stores opposite it. This place happened to be at a crossroads. Someone was setting off fireworks in the middle of the intersection. The moment the fireworks lit up, it successfully broke the stalemate between the two of them. Shi Mengwan didn't look for too long. When she realized that Zhang Haoze seemed to be in a daze, she knew that the opportunity had come. Shi Mengwan quickly got up the moment Zhang Haoze turned his head. She walked around to the back of the desk. Her feet were still a little numb, so she chose to ignore it. She picked up her purse and car keys and prepared to leave. Her footsteps were a little fast. At this moment, she couldn't care about anything else and quickly headed outside. When her hand touched the door, he didn't follow her. When she went downstairs and walked to the door, he didn't seem to follow her either. She walked out of the company's door and stopped. No matter what, the door had to be locked. As soon as she turned around, she saw that Zhang Haoze had followed her. Startled, she instinctively took a step back. Seeing that he had come out, she closed the door and went to the elevator. The corridor was very quiet except for the footsteps of the two people. There was no other way. The stairs are around the corner next to the elevator. Shi Mengwan stood by the elevator, pressed the button, and waited for the elevator to arrive. When she entered the elevator, Shi Mengwan hesitated for a moment, but it was only for a moment. She went in, stood at the position of the button, and pressed the button for the first floor. Jean Hauser followed her in. He didn't speak, and she didn't speak either. She didn't want to look at him, but the wall of the elevator was a mirror. She didn't need to turn around to see the man's figure. Jean Hauser's figure was really good. The black windbreaker made him look imposing, but he had a handsomeness that wasn't inferior to that of a model. He had an inverted triangle figure, tall and strong, and a pair of long and slender legs. Further up, she retracted her gaze and didn't look at Jean Hauser's gaze. She felt that after what happened just now, he should have given up. That was good. It wasn't until she got into the car that Shi Mengwan felt that she was thinking too well. She sat in the driver's seat and looked at Jean Hauser in the passenger seat. Jean Hauser, please get out of the car. Jean Hauser sat still. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth. Jean Hauser, I'll say it again. I'm not a casual woman. The anger on her face was too obvious. Jean Hauser glanced at her and his voice was very soft. I'm not either. I'm not a prostitute, and I don't want to be Chen Feifei's substitute. Her voice couldn't help but rise a notch with suppressed anger. When Jean Hauser heard Chen Feifei's name, a trace of disgust inevitably flashed across his face. That emotion came and went quickly, so Shi Mengwan didn't see it clearly. She thought that he didn't hear it, so she didn't mind saying it again. Jean Hauser, I'll say it again. I'm not a prostitute, and I'm not a casual woman. What about before? Jean Hauser suddenly approached her and stared at her face. Shi Mengwan's lips opened and closed and opened again. Under his sharp gaze, she was the first to admit defeat. I've said it before, I treat you as someone else. Any man wouldn't be able to stand her words and would leave, right? Then continue. Jean Hauser said this. Shi Mengwan blinked and took some time to understand what he meant. I refuse. Jean Hauser didn't say anything. Instead, he closed his eyes and relaxed his body, as if he wanted to sleep. Jean Hauser. Shi Mengwan called out and realized that Jean Hauser didn't want to open his eyes at all. She became more and more annoyed. After a stalemate for nearly 3 minutes, when there was another burst of fireworks outside, she finally couldn't help but start the car. Forget it. On the first day of the new year, she told herself that she just didn't want to have a conflict with Jean Hauser on such a day. The car stopped outside her apartment. She turned around and was about to call Jean Hauser. She realized that he seemed to have really fallen asleep. Shi Mengwan was about to speak, but she saw the darkness in Jean Hauser's eyes. She didn't notice it before, but now she saw that Jean Hauser's expression didn't look very good. There were faint green marks under his eyes, and there were also some green marks on his chin. It looked like he really didn't have a good rest. Shi Mengwan didn't speak. Through the sleeping face in front of her, she seemed to see the 15-year-old Xiao Zhe again. That was also New Year's Day, their first New Year together. She left home. Although she missed it, she was still a child. If there were other things to distract her, she wouldn't have the time to miss home. It was the same on New Year's Day that year. The pollution between them wasn't as serious as it was now, and Lin City didn't ban the setting off of fireworks. Not only was it not banned, but there was also a fireworks party in a newly built park in Lin City on New Year's Day. Why did she know? It was also because the people living nearby were on holiday at that time. She heard people talk about it. She was only 12 years old, and she also wanted to see it. When she was eating with her dear brother, she told him about it. Of course, she just wanted to go. She didn't really have to go. The park was very far from the bungalow they lived in. Not only did they have to transfer 2 buses, it would take at least an hour to get there. It was too much trouble. Most importantly, at that time, there weren't as many subway lines as there were now. There were only 2 subway lines. It was already very late after the fireworks party ended. If they wanted to come back, there would be no bus, so they could only take a taxi back. Their financial situation at that time didn't allow them to go to the fireworks party at all. She could only say it casually. The youth didn't pay attention to her at that time, but on the next day, which was New Year's Day, he took her out in the afternoon. "Dear brother, where are we going?" After spending a few months together, Shi Mengwan became more and more comfortable calling the youth dear brother. "Guess." "I can't guess." Shi Mengwan shook her head. Today was the first day of the new year. She looked at the street and saw that there were really a lot of people. The bus was a little crowded. She almost fell when she made 2 turns. "Be careful, hold me." The youth's voice had improved a little over the past few months, but it was still a little hoarse and unpleasant to hear. She looked at him. He was taller than her, and his hand was holding the ring on top. She pursed her lips and directly held his hand. When the bus made another turn, her body fell to the side again. The youth supported her with his hand that wasn't holding the ring. Although he was thin and small, he was quite strong. She was in his arms, half surrounded and protected. No matter how the people behind her shook and squeezed, she didn't fall anymore. At that time, she looked up at him and felt extremely at ease. If it weren't for her dear brother, she might have gone home long ago. But because of him, she always felt at ease. She lowered her head and smiled happily. "What are you smiling at?" "Nothing." Shi Mengwan shook her head. When they arrived at their destination, she realized that they had come to the park where the fireworks party was held. You have a ticket." As far as she knew, because there was a fireworks party on that day, tickets were needed for the park that was usually open today. No. More than 10 years ago, the cheapest ticket cost more than 100 yuan, and the ones inside were even more expensive. The youth held her hand. "Follow me. You can see it without a ticket." What did he mean? Shi Mengwan had been following the youth and only found out later. Near the park, there was a building that had just started to be built. One of the buildings had already been completed, but it hadn't been accepted yet. The young man was very bold. In the dim light of the night, he brought her to the roof. The night wind was very strong and cold. They could see the park opposite from where they were sitting. "It'll start in a while." When the youth went out, he carried a bag. At that time, she didn't understand why the youth carried a bag. Only now did she understand. The youth took out a pair of binoculars and gave them to her. "Use this to look." "Thank you." Shi Mengwan smiled. With the binoculars, she could see some of the performances in the park very clearly. It was very loud, and they could hear it from here. She was very happy, especially today. There was a group that she used to like very much. She couldn't help but turn around and point it out to the youth. However, she realized that the youth wasn't watching the performance in the park, but was looking at her. "Dear brother." Was there something dirty on her face? "It's nothing. You can watch if you like." The youth turned his face away. The night was too dark, so she didn't see it. The youth's ears were also slightly red. She just held the binoculars and watched with great interest. The youth not only prepared the binoculars, but also snacks and water. They were all things that little girls would like. When the fireworks party started, the binoculars weren't even needed. Because she was very close, she could see very clearly. There were all kinds of fireworks, colorful and dazzling. She had never seen so many forms of fireworks. She was very excited, but she couldn't help but feel a chill. The young man looked at her, and just like when they were on the bus, he pulled her into his arms. He was clearly so thin, but his arms were so warm. She didn't feel cold. Instead, she became more and more interested. The scene that night was like an extremely brilliant dream that she would never forget for the rest of her life. After the fireworks party ended, there were no buses. The youth actually took a taxi and took her back. At that time, she wanted to ask him where the money came from. But the youth didn't say, so she didn't ask. When the car stopped outside the alley, she was a little sleepy and wanted to sleep. She had always lived a very regular life. When it was time, she would go to sleep. The youth didn't wake her up. Instead, he carried her on his back and carried her home just like that. Her thoughts came back to her senses from the drowsiness that day. Shi Mengwan realized that Zhang Haoze had woken up at some point in time. She retracted her gaze, bit her lip, and quickly got out of the car. This time, when Zhang Haoze followed behind her, she didn't let him leave again. She knew that it was useless. When she entered the bathroom to take a shower, Shi Mengwan looked at herself in the mirror and felt a little conflicted. She bit her lip. Why couldn't she make up her mind to solve something that she knew was wrong? Forget it. Today was the first day of the new year. If there was anything else, she could talk about it after today. Shi Mengwan told herself that after today, she would definitely chase Zhang Haoze away. Even though she knew that she couldn't do anything to Zhang Haoze. To Shi Mengwan's surprise, when she returned to her room after taking a shower, Zhang Haoze was already lying on the bed. His eyes were closed, and he seemed to have fallen asleep again. Was he very sleepy? Shi Mengwan wanted to ask, but she felt that she couldn't get anything out of him. She went to bed and fell asleep. Just as she turned off the light, Zhang Haoze reached out his hand. Her body stiffened for a moment. She didn't like this. She didn't like that every time Zhang Haoze came, he wanted to have sex with her. She didn't like that he only had passion in bed and coldness outside of bed. To her surprise, Zhang Haoze only hugged her. Sensing that her body was stiff, he buried his face in the pit of her neck and gently rubbed her neck. I'm very sleepy. I want to sleep. He lowered his voice and didn't say another word. The man seemed to be really sleepy and wanted to sleep. Shi Mengwan waited for a while and heard the man's long breathing. She froze for a moment and couldn't help but look up at the man's face. The lights in the room were already off, and the curtains were drawn. She couldn't see clearly. It was dark. She thought about the dark shadow on the man's face just now, and the fatigue on the man's face. A flash of heartache flashed across her heart, but she tried her best to restrain it. She told herself that it had nothing to do with her. But no matter how much mental preparation she made, Shi Mengwan still raised her hand. Just as she was about to touch the man's face, she retracted it. She closed her eyes and pressed her face against his heart when he was unconscious. Listening to his steady heartbeat, she fell asleep. When Shi Mengwan woke up in the morning, Zhang Haoze was still sleeping. He seemed to have really fallen asleep. She stared at his sleeping face for a long time, then gently retreated from his arms. After washing up, Shi Mengwan realized that Zhang Haoze was still asleep. She ignored him and went straight to the kitchen. After searching for the ingredients, Shi Mengwan decided to make the simplest breakfast. She took one set of ingredients, but when she thought of the person who was sleeping in the room, she still took 2 more sets of ingredients. She remembered that he had always had a big appetite. In the room, Zhang Haoze didn't sleep for long. He was woken up by the ringing of his phone. He picked up the phone. It was Chen Feifei. Brother Hao, when are you coming back? Feifei. Zhang Haoze looked at the time and sat up. Brother Hao. Chen Feifei, who was on the other end of the phone, seemed to hear something different. What's wrong with your voice? Are you sleeping? No. Jean Hauser shook his head and his voice returned to its usual calmness. What's the matter? Of course there's something. It's New Year's Day. It's New Year's Day, but you're actually going on a business trip. You're not coming back to accompany me. There was silence. Jean Hauser didn't answer, and Chen Feifei didn't really want him to. Dad is too much. Why did he let you go on a business trip so far away by yourself? You still have to go for so many days. Are the people raised by the company all useless? Feifei. Jean Hauser's voice changed. Chen Feifei gritted her teeth. Okay, I know this is because Dad trusts you. But I'm just not happy. I want you to accompany me. Wait for me to come back. Jean Hauser's voice was indifferent. Is there anything else? Yes. Chen Feifei thought of the news she had received before. I heard that the marketing manager of the partner company is very beautiful. Do you think she's beautiful or me? Jean Hauser didn't want to answer this question at all. That's all you want to ask. Then I'll hang up. I still have a meeting later. Brother Hao. Chen Feifei gritted her teeth with a ferocious expression. Jean Hauser wasn't in front of her, and she wasn't afraid of being seen by him. Jean Hauser hung up the phone and went back to sleep. His phone rang again. He looked at the number and picked it up. How is it? Is it convenient over there? Everything is going well. Tang Hua's voice sounded on the other end of the phone. The things you asked for have been resolved. Yes. Jean Hauser knew that it would definitely be resolved. Speaking of which, why are you in such a hurry to return to Lin City? Tang Hua realized that he didn't quite understand this boss recently. You compressed the business that would take a week to finish to 3 days and rushed back to Lin City today. Why? You're not going to accompany the little princess of the Qin family, are you? Jean Hauser rubbed the space between his eyebrows and didn't answer Tang Hua's question. Finish everything and strike while the iron is hot. Take over the territory in H City as well. When it came to business, Tang Hua's attitude was much more serious. Okay, it's just that it's the new year, and they're making a lot of moves here. It's better to make more moves. It's best to muddy the waters. When the time comes, it'll be easier for us to do things. Yes. Tang Hua nodded and thought of something else. Oh right, sixth brother has been clamoring to go to Lin City to help you. What do you think about this? Don't let him come. Jean Hauser thought of something. Let him go to Qing City. Boss. The way he addressed him didn't change Jean Hauser's decision. Not only sixth brother, but also fourth brother and seventh brother. Just say that I said it. Yes. Tell fourth brother that I'm ready to pull in the net. Okay. Tang Hua's voice was a little excited. Jean Hauser hung up the phone, but he was no longer sleepy. When he was about to get up, he realized that Shi Mengwan was standing at the door of the room and looking at him. The space between his brows twitched slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and looked away from Jean Hauser's firm chest. She turned around and left quickly. If it wasn't for Jean Hauser's good hearing, he wouldn't have heard Shi Mengwan say the word "geet." The dining room was very quiet. Shi Mengwan's house wasn't big. The dining room and the living room were connected. She sat at one end of the dining table, and Jean Hauser sat opposite her. She placed 2 sandwiches in front of him and a glass of milk in front of him. She ate the sandwich in front of her and didn't look at Jean Hauser. How similar was the atmosphere in front of her to 13 years ago? The scene was similar, but the people were different. Shi Mengwan suddenly lost her appetite. She casually took a few bites and finished the sandwich. She got up and didn't go back to her room. Without looking at John Hauser, she went straight to the living room and turned on the TV. She rarely watched TV. At this moment, the TV was replaying the New Year's Eve party the day before yesterday. She didn't know when it started, but some satellite TV stations competed to hold the New Year's Eve party every year. She didn't change the channel. She just stared at the TV in a daze until a very sexy female voice came from the phone. She sang with a very textured voice. There are so many scenes, so many romantic, so many people's hearts are sad, and they get together and part on good terms. I can't finish watching it for many days. You liked it when I kissed you just now, right? Otherwise, why did you keep holding my hand and not let go? You said you really wanted to take me back to your hometown. Slowly like you, slowly get intimate, slowly talk about yourself, slowly walk with you, slowly want to cooperate with you, slowly give me to you. Sure, Mengwan couldn't help but start to daydream again. Those scenes were actually really not romantic, but she really wanted to slowly walk with Jean Hauser and slowly give herself to him. She turned her face in the direction of the dining table and found that Jean Hauser had finished eating at some point. He got up and walked to the sofa. She was looking at him, and he was also looking at her. He also saw the television. Perhaps Shi Mingwan's gaze was too direct. Jean Hauser walked to her side and sat down. He pulled her body into his arms, lowered his head, and kissed her lips directly and accurately. Shi Mengwan blinked and didn't refuse. Jean Hauser pressed her body onto the sofa. Shi Mengwan bore his weight and raised her hand to wrap around his neck. The sofa wasn't small, but it was a little difficult to accommodate two adults. In order not to fall, she hugged him tightly, and he hugged her body tightly. The air conditioner in the living room wasn't turned on, so Shi Mengwan was actually a little cold. However, it was only cold for a moment, and it quickly warmed up. When her clothes were torn apart and her body was hit by him, Shi Mengwan's heart flashed with bitterness. At this moment, she suddenly realized something. Jean Hauser wasn't the only one who liked to do this. In fact, she liked it too. Because only at this moment, only when he was one with her, would she have the real feeling that he was her dear brother. Chapter 662. Shi Mingwan's body curled up there. She didn't speak, nor did she look at Jean Hauser. It was one thing to admit it in his heart, but it was another to show it and say it out loud. She felt ashamed. In fact, every time she had intimate relations with Jean Hauser, she felt ashamed. This was something that could not be controlled. The greater the satisfaction when they were together, the greater the emptiness after. Her body was carried into Jean Hauser's arms, but she suddenly waved his hand away. Don't touch me. Jean Hauser's hand stopped in midair. Looking at her back, he didn't seem to understand what was wrong with her. Shi Mengwan didn't look at him. She quickly got up, hurriedly picked up the outermost clothes to cover her body, and then went into the bathroom. She locked the door and stayed inside for nearly half an hour. When he came out again, he had already tidied himself up. She returned to the living room and found that Jean Hauser was still sitting on the sofa. You're still not leaving. Shouldn't he have left at this time in the past? Jean Hauser sat on the sofa and looked at her. She had just taken a shower, and her skin was red. Her face looked tender, like a lotus flower that had just come out of the water. Jean Hauser didn't leave. He even reached out to her. Shi Mengwan looked at the outstretched hand for a long time. Instead of going over, she went to her small study. She didn't want to see Jean Hauser, so she could only let herself draw. Yesterday, she had saved her sketches in the mailbox. Now, all she had to do was open it and finish the rest. She had an idea in her mind to make a collection out of yesterday's dress. The entire series is themed around cherry blossoms. She was a person who immersed herself in her work and did not care about anything else. It was only when she heard a knock on the door that she thought she had misheard. She looked up and found John Hauser standing at the door. He was really free today. Shi Mengwan was a little puzzled. Why didn't he leave after finishing it like before? Time to eat, he said. Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. She blinked her eyes, as if she only had the time now to pay attention to the time. It was almost 1 o'clock. Eat. His cooking. Shi Mengwan looked at John Hauser and remembered that he didn't know how to cook. She was a little curious and couldn't care less that she didn't want to see him just now. He got up and went outside. There were 4 dishes and 1 soup on the dining table. From the looks of it, one could tell that it was made by a chef. She was so engrossed in drawing that she didn't hear the door open. John Hauser sat down at the dining table. Shi Mengwan glanced at him and sat down as well. The meal was eaten in silence. Shi Mengwan glanced at John Hauser as she scooped the rice. It was a familiar movement and a familiar face. She withdrew her gaze and forced herself not to look at him again. After dinner, Shi Mengwan noticed a detail. John Hauser wasn't wearing the same clothes as yesterday. This discovery made her wonder if the clothes John Hauser left here last time looked like this. How could she not remember? She thought about the takeout that had just arrived. Someone had come when she was in the study drawing. They sent Chinese food and John Hauser's clothes over. She couldn't help but look at John Hauser. If she remembered correctly, he had left more than 1 set of clothes here. What was he trying to do? Come often? Or what? Once this thought came to her mind, Shi Mengwan couldn't sit still anymore. She didn't go back to the study to draw a draft. Instead, she sat down on the sofa and looked at John Hauser. She wanted to have a good talk with him. She had just sat down when John Hauser came over. He sat next to her and wrapped his big hands around her waist. Her body stiffened for a moment, but it was only for a moment. Soon, she was completely hugged by him. Her back was very tense. She tried her best to keep a certain distance from him, but it was almost impossible under such circumstances. His chin rested in the crook of her neck, and he held her tightly against him. John Hauser, the atmosphere in front of her wasn't right. She was afraid that he would act recklessly again when he got excited. In order to divert her attention, she picked up the remote control and turned on the TV. It happened to be a variety show. Shi Mengwan wasn't very interested in these things, but she forced herself to focus on the TV. It was a very popular show in recent years. A few guests were trying their best to amuse people. Shi Mengwan wasn't amused, but she watched very seriously. At first, she was afraid that John Hauser would do it again, but later, she realized that he didn't do anything else. She calmed down. John Hauser. Yes. Are you okay? He should be very busy, right? Didn't he have to go to work? Although she didn't know what he was doing now, she remembered that the last time they met, he knew Su Qingsang and even called her Mrs. Hua. He was also there at Hua Jinyao's company's banquet. He had the demeanor of a business elite. Didn't he have to go to work? John Hauser frowned slightly when she saw how she couldn't wait for him to leave. The hand on her waist tightened. I'm free today. Didn't she say that she wasn't leaving? She resisted the urge to chase him away. Are you that free? There was a hint of sarcasm in her words. John Hauser heard it, but he wasn't angry. I'm not free. But he was free today. He compressed his work into 3 days to complete it, so he could be free today and tomorrow. Shi Mengwan was speechless. She thought to herself that she wanted to chase him away, but now she didn't know how to respond. While she was in a dilemma, he gently moved her face slightly. Her body pressed closer to him. Her overly intimate behavior made her turn her face to look at the TV and focus all her attention on it. What plans do you have today? Plans? What plans could she have? It turned out that she wanted to go home to accompany her parents and family, but because of the sudden order, she returned to Lin City. She turned to look at Jean Hauser, and he was also looking at her. Jean Hauser's eyes flashed with uneasiness when she looked at him with a puzzled gaze, but it was only for a moment. Aren't you going out? Today was the last day of the long holiday. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and turned to look at Jean Hauser. Her waist was still sore, which made her lack the mood to go out. I don't want to go out. The atmosphere was a little awkward. She turned to look at him. She had many questions to ask, such as what had happened to him. For example, why did he forget everything in the past? Or for example, why did he come? What was he thinking? What did he think she was? But in the end, those questions turned into silence. She turned her face away and forced herself to focus on the TV again. She sat in his arms, and the two of them snuggled together. Their posture was very intimate. Shi Mingwan's face was pressed against his chest. She couldn't tell what she was feeling. She couldn't help but sneak glances at him. His jawline was perfect, and his gaze was on the TV in front of him. Sensing her gaze, he turned his face to look at her. Shi Mengwan quickly retracted her gaze like a thief. Her heart was beating a little fast, but before she could turn her face away, Jean Hauser's hand was already on her cheek. He stared at her face, tilted his head, and kissed her lips just like that. The kiss was fiery hot, with his nice mint smell. Shi Mengwan didn't even know how to breathe after kissing, but now she could already respond to him. She knew his actions and what he was going to do next. His lips weren't as cold as his person. Instead, they were very soft and warm. Her eyes gradually became a little blurry. It wasn't until she felt Jean Hauser's hand slowly slide down from her waist, as if he was going to go further, that she grabbed his hand. She took a step back, stared at his face, and swallowed her saliva. No. Don't do this kind of thing every time. Don't come here every time, as if he was treating her as a target to vent. She couldn't stand this. Jean Hauser looked at her with a deep gaze, with emotions that she couldn't understand. In the end, he didn't continue. Instead, he wrapped his arms around her waist again and started watching TV again. Shi Mengwan didn't pay attention to what was on TV at all. She didn't expect Jean Hauser to actually stop. This made her feel a little strange. She didn't sleep much yesterday, and she woke up quite early today. She was dizzy and slowly closed her eyes again. Shi Mengwan remembered that after eating the wine-brewed meatballs on the Lantern Festival, Qiao Zhe left early and returned late for a few days. They slept on the same bed, but they couldn't see each other. She didn't understand what was wrong, but she felt that he might think she was being frivolous. After all, she came from a small town. Her parents had always been strict, and she knew that she might have done something wrong. When she thought of this, she almost couldn't control herself. It was as if she wanted to prove something, but it was also as if she wanted to get an answer. She woke up early and stopped the young man when he was about to go out. "Dear brother, why have you ignored me these few days?" She looked at the young man's handsome features, her little face full of confusion. Qiao Zhe didn't dare to look at Shi Mingwan's eyes. He was 15 years old, and there were usually some people by his side. He had also seen a lot of things. He knew what he meant that night, but he was too ashamed to say it out loud. He had feelings for this girl who was still a young girl. In his eyes, this was shameful and couldn't be said. He didn't even dare to face Shi Mengwan. She called him brother and treated him as her brother. She came and suffered with him. She cooked for him and washed his clothes. She took care of his daily life. This small house, because of Shi Mengwan, unexpectedly felt like a home. He felt very guilty. The young man's thoughts were secretive and couldn't be told. She wasn't even 14 years old. At this moment, when he met Shi Mengwan's clear eyes, he looked away. "I'm not ignoring you. You're thinking too much." The young man's voice was about to go through puberty. It was still a little hoarse, but it was a little clearer. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and shook her head. "No, it's not like that. You're just avoiding me. You're ignoring me." "It's nothing," the young man replied in a muffled voice and turned to leave. Shi Mengwan quickly blocked in front of him. Her eyes unexpectedly revealed a maturity that didn't belong to her age. "Where are you going?" "I'm not going anywhere." "Where are you going if you're not going?" "I'm going to. I'm going to earn money. I'm going to. I can help you." "I don't want your help." "Why?" Shi Mengwan decided to get to the bottom of it. "Why can't I go? I eat and use your food every day, and I can also work hard to support myself. I want to help." "I told you, I don't want your help." Could she go where he was going? A hint of anxiety appeared on the young man's face. "Make way. I'm leaving." His tone was a little anxious, but it wasn't fierce. Shi Mengwan's face darkened as she took a step forward. "I just want to help you. I said it's not suitable for you. Do you hate me?" Shi Mengwan felt a rare sense of loss and hurt in her heart. "Tell me honestly, do you hate me?" "What nonsense are you talking about?" If he could hate her, he wouldn't be so unable to face her. "You still say no. You wouldn't have spoken to me in such a tone in the past, and you wouldn't have treated me like this." Other than the first month she came, she got along with Qiao Zhe like brother and sister. She thought that in his heart, even if he couldn't treat her as his biological sister, he would at least take good care of her. She had a special status. Shi Mengwan's unreasonable pestering made the young man a little angry. Without thinking, he walked past her and was about to leave. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth and blocked him with determination. "Tell me, do you dislike me?" She was embarrassed to say that sentence, but now she had to say it. "You dislike me, don't you? Because you think I'm frivolous, you think I'm casual, and I think I'm the kind of girl who doesn't have self-respect. Isn't that right?" "What nonsense are you talking about?" "That's what you think." Shi Mengwan bit her lip and was immersed in great sadness. "If that's not the case, why are you ignoring me? Is it because I kissed you that day?" It was fine if she didn't mention that day, but when she mentioned that day, the young man's face instantly turned red. Half of it was because he was embarrassed, and the other half was because he was anxious. "If you dislike me, I'll leave now." Shi Mengwan didn't see the young man's awkwardness. She turned around and was about to open the door. Her body was hugged by the young man. His skinny and muscular arms circled her waist tightly. "Stop fooling around." The young man's rare fierce tone shocked Shi Mengwan. She turned around. The young man looked at her and said in an unfriendly tone, "I really don't dislike you, and I don't think you're frivolous." If she was frivolous, then what about him who kissed her first? What about him? He thought about her entering his dreams, and even his dreams were filled with shameful scenes. What about him? Meeting the girl's clear eyes, he couldn't say a single word. He didn't want the girl to think that he was dirty and dirty. I've just been too busy recently. I promise you, I'll come back earlier in the future." "Then, can you not go today?" "No." He promised sixth brother that he would take the lead today. "Not today." "How about tomorrow?" I won't go anywhere tomorrow. I'll stay at home with you. You said that. I said it. I promise. Afraid that the girl wouldn't believe him, the young man almost raised 3 fingers to swear. Shi Mengwan was satisfied, and a smile appeared on her face. Then you go. I'll wait for you at home. The young man glanced at her, nodded, and turned to leave. At night, the young man lay on the same bed as the girl again. In fact, ever since he discovered his secret thoughts, the young man wanted nothing more than to stay far away from the girl. But he couldn't. There was no heating in Lin City in winter, and there was no air conditioning in the house. It was especially cold at night. If he slept on the sofa, he would definitely catch a cold. He carefully slept on the side of the bed, wanting to avoid the girl's approach. However, the ubiquitous chill that night made the girl instinctively lean towards him. Sometimes, when Shi Mengwan was in a daze, she would open her eyes to see where she was. Dear brother. She murmured softly, then moved her face closer to him and fell asleep again. At first, she would still keep her distance from him, but as the two of them spent more and more time together, she became more and more at ease with him. However, she didn't know that this kind of relief was a great torment for the young man. After all, he was only 15 years old. After the new year, he would already be 16 years old according to the rules in Lin City. The young man was strong and had just experienced his first awakening of love. How could he have such good self-control? Looking at the girl's sleeping face in his arms, he couldn't bear to push her away. He gently adjusted the angle of his arm to make the girl sleep more comfortably. The touch of her smooth and fair skin made his heart race. When Shi Mengwan woke up in the morning, she found herself sleeping in the young man's arms. Her face was tightly pressed against his chest. The young man used to sleep bare-chested. Ever since the girl shared a bed with him, he would wear a t-shirt. Shi Mengwan opened her eyes and saw a suspicious circle of watermarks on his t-shirt. Her face instantly turned red. She hurriedly jumped out of bed. She didn't dare to face the young man. She couldn't be drooling when she fell asleep, could she? Shi Mengwan was abnormally embarrassed by this discovery. She didn't dare to look at the young man at all. She quickly put on her clothes and flashed into the kitchen. She didn't look at the young man again. What she didn't know was that after she left, the young man grabbed the pajamas she left on the bed. He smelled the smell on it, and his hand couldn't help but reach into his own clothes and go down. Shi Mengwan was in a daze. She felt as if there were feathers gently brushing against her face. She felt itchy and woke up from her sleep. When she opened her eyes, the handsome face in front of her gave her a fright. She tried to step back, but someone held her waist. At the same time, something fell to the ground. She blinked her eyes and suddenly realized her current state. She was asleep, and she was even sleeping on Zhang Hao's lap. And his face was right above her. What fell to the ground just now was a small blanket on the sofa. It had been covering her before. He was holding his phone in his hand. When he saw that she was awake, he put the phone aside. You're awake. Shi Mengwan quickly sat up. She had just woken up, so for a moment, she couldn't even tell if it was a dream or reality. She wanted to call him dear brother, but she was embarrassed. In the end, she shook her head. She sat up straight. Why didn't you wake me up? She was asleep, and she was still sleeping on his lap. Why didn't he wake her up? Zhang Hao didn't say anything. He just gently brushed his hand against the corner of her lips. That action made Shi Mengwan freeze again. She didn't dare to move at all. Do you want to go out for dinner? She had slept for almost the entire afternoon, and it was almost 5:00 now. Go out for dinner? Yes. Jean Hause moved his feet without leaving a trace. Shi Mengwan had slept on his lap for too long, and his feet were a little numb. Shi Mengwan was thinking about his suggestion when she saw his movements from the corner of her eye. She immediately understood. She might have been too tired to sleep for so long. Didn't he know that she should just leave him on the sofa like this? You don't want to go out. Go. Shi Mengwan answered casually. After she finished answering, she realized what she had agreed to. Then, let's go change. She was still wearing the same housecoat from yesterday. It was too late for Shi Mengwan to go back on her word. She glanced at Jean Hause and hurried into the room. In less than 10 minutes, Shi Mengwan changed her clothes and came out. Jean Hause was already standing at the door, holding his trench coat in his hand. She glanced down at his feet. Her face was a little hot. Was she too confident in Jean Hause? She actually fell asleep on his lap. She lowered her head and reached for the car key, but Jean Hause took it. Let's go. The two of them went downstairs together. Shi Mengwan stood half an arm away from Jean Hause. After leaving the door, the cold wind blew, and Shi Mengwan was completely awake. Now, she was a little regretful. She shouldn't have come out. If she had known earlier, she would have ordered takeout. What do you want to eat? Jean Hause asked her. She shook her head. Anything. After saying that, she realized that this answer seemed to be one of the most annoying answers. According to the internet, it was the most annoying to ask someone what they wanted to eat. She explained a little embarrassedly, I'm not picky. During that year when they were together, what hadn't they suffered? What hadn't they suffered? Jean Hause glanced at her and didn't say anything. The two of them got into the car. He sat in the driver's seat. Anything. Shi Mengwan looked up at the signboard in front of her. The two big words on it made her a little dumbfounded. Jean Hause didn't look at her and led her inside. The signboard on the door was anything. They entered the door. It was a small courtyard. After passing through the courtyard, there were a few private rooms. Someone came over and led the two of them to one of them. They entered the door. The waiter served tea. Shi Mengwan took a sip. It was Longjing. She didn't know much about tea, but she used to have a client who was in the tea business. She kind of understood. After the tea was served, she didn't see anyone. No one brought the menu over. She looked at Jean Hause in surprise. Don't you need to order? No. Jean House's voice was very soft. This shop is called Anything, which means that they don't allow people to order. Their chef will serve the dishes according to the number of people who come. There was such a shop in Lin City. Shi Mengwan really didn't know. The private room wasn't big and was decorated very elegantly. There were only the two of them, but it was too quiet. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and tried to find something to say. How did you know about this place? I found it by accident. Jean Hause lowered his head and drank his tea. He didn't say how he found it by accident. Shi Mengwan didn't ask anymore. When she came in just now, she saw the small courtyard outside and felt that it was very interesting. Now, she wanted to go out and take a look. Can I go out and take a look? Sure. Jean Hause looked at the curiosity on her face. Do you want me to accompany you? No need, I'll just take a look. In this season, she seemed to have seen a plum blossom in the courtyard outside. It wasn't the flowering season yet, but she seemed to have seen the bud. She wanted to confirm it. Jean Hause watched her stand up and didn't follow her. He only added softly. The owner of this shop is very nice. You can look around. Chapter 663. The moment Shi Mengwan saw that person, she wanted to step back, but it was too late. She didn't expect to meet Qiu Yanbo here. She felt guilty for a moment and wanted to step back, but Qiu Yanbo had already seen her. She was close to Su Qingsang and had met Qiu Yanbo a few times. She nodded at him and walked past him to continue walking outside. She wasn't close to Qiu Yanbo, so she wasn't worried that he would tell Su Qingsang. It didn't matter even if they met. However, after taking 2 steps, she saw that there were other people following behind Qiu Yanbo. They were none other than Su Qinghui and Hu Jinyao. "Hello, uncle." She didn't have to greet Qiu Yanbo, but she had to greet Su Qinghui. "Hu Jinyao." "Hello." She had a good relationship with Su Qingsang and was familiar with Hu Jinyao, so she called him by his name. "Yes." Hu Jinyao nodded. He was the one who was most familiar with Shi Mengwan among the 3 of them. "Are you alone?" "I'm having dinner with a client." Hu Jinyao finally saw Shi Mengwan. "What about you?" "Same as you." Shi Mengwan smiled. "I was wondering why you didn't accompany Qingsang to Japan." "Yeah." He really wanted to go to Japan with Su Qingsang. The reasons why he didn't go were that he had to discuss a collaboration project recently. The other reason was that, like Shi Mengwan, he wanted to give Su Qingsang and Xiang Kaiping a chance to be alone. She glanced at Su Qinghui, who acted as if he hadn't heard her. "Go on with your work. I'm just looking around." Shi Mengwan tried her best to smile like usual. Hu Jinyao wouldn't pay attention to women other than Su Qingsang, so he didn't think too much into it. After saying goodbye to Shi Mengwan, the 3 of them went to the private room in the opposite direction. While Shi Mengwan was relieved, she also felt a little worried. Lin City was only so big, but she followed Zhang Haoze out to eat like this. Zhang Haoze and Hu Jinyao's company seemed to be working together. If they met, she didn't even dare to think about it. He was no longer in the mood to appreciate the scenery outside. Shi Mengwan returned to the private room. Zhang Haoze seemed to be on the phone. When he saw her come in, he said to the other end of the phone and hung up. "Are you done?" "No." Shi Mengwan walked to the seat opposite him and sat down. She glanced at him, picked up the tea in front of her, and took a sip. The tea was already cold. Zhang Haoze looked at her and raised his hand to refill the teacup in front of her. Shi Mengwan held the cup. The warm teacup made her slightly relieved, but she was still a little worried. She didn't seem to be in the right mood. She was still in high spirits when she went out, but now her attitude had suddenly changed. Zhang Haoze looked at her but didn't say anything. He picked up the teacup in front of him and drank some tea. After a moment of silence, Shi Mengwan bit her lip, put down her teacup, and looked at Zhang Haoze. "What happened?" "I'm fine." Shi Mengwan still wanted to say something, but the waiter had already started to serve the dishes. The soup was cooled down and warmed up 3 times. The portion was not much. However, the dishes looked good and exquisite. Shi Mengwan was a foodie. Although the dishes in front of her were local dishes in Lin City, they were very appetizing. She picked up her chopsticks and temporarily forgot about her encounter with Hu Jinyao. After dinner, when Zhang Haoze got up and was about to leave, he found that Shi Mengwan was sitting there without moving. Zhang Haoze stopped and stood at the door to look at her, as if he didn't understand what she was thinking. "Zhang Haoze, wait a moment." She got up and walked in front of him, not letting him open the door. I met Hu Jinyao just now." "Huh? Hu Jinyao? What was he doing here?" Zhang Haoze thought for a moment and immediately thought of it. Li Junxing came to Lin City. He and Hu Jinyao grew up together, so he took good care of Hu Jinyao. Recently, there was a big project. Hu Jinyao might have wanted to help his father-in-law's family, so he got the Li Corporation to cooperate. Is there a back door here? Back door? Yes. Shi Mengwan nodded. I think, if possible, we'd better not meet them, right? What do you mean? Zhang Hao's face instantly changed. I can't be seen. Isn't that so? Shi Mengwan didn't back down like before. She looked up at him. She cleared her throat with a bitterness that she didn't even notice. All right, it's not that you can't be seen, it's that I can't be seen. She lowered her head to look at him, her gaze calm. You have a fiancé. Tell me, how can I appear in front of others with you? Especially since that person was Hu Jinyao, Su Qingsang's husband. If he saw her with Zhang Hao, he would definitely tell Su Qingsang. I said, I don't have a fiancé. Then what about Miss Qin? Shi Mengwan didn't want to be aggressive, nor did she want to question him, nor did she want to give people such a feeling. But she couldn't help it. She's not your fiancé, then who is she? Your girlfriend. Zhang Hao's expression was very ugly now. His lips were pursed into a straight line. Anyone who knew him would know that this was a sign that he was about to lose his temper. However, Shi Mengwan didn't know him. What she knew was the big brother in her dreams. Not the Zhang Hao in front of her, who had been separated from her for more than 10 years and had forgotten everything about the past. Shi Mengwan, I'll say it again. She's not my girlfriend. She's not my fiancé either. Oh. Shi Mengwan gave a faint oh. It was obvious that she didn't believe him. Zhang Hao looked at her face and suddenly pulled her into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her lips. She had just drunk the Longjing tea, and there was still the fragrance of the tea in her mouth. There was also a hint of bitterness in the fragrance. Shi Mengwan didn't move. She just stared at him with her eyes wide open. Her eyes were clear and straightforward. There were clear emotions in them. She wouldn't resist. She would let him do whatever he wanted. But she didn't believe him, nor did she believe his words. That was it. Zhang Hao seemed to be annoyed and increased the strength on his lips. She was in pain, but she refused to give in. She didn't want to go out with him like this. It wouldn't be good if they met Hu Jinyao. Zhang Hao knew what she was thinking. He bit her lips. It wasn't hard, but it hurt. She was really in pain, but she looked straight at him. She didn't give him a response, nor did she step back. She didn't even respond. He suddenly let go of her and took a step back. Her breathing was a little heavy, and so was he. He looked at her deeply, then suddenly reached out, opened the door, and walked out. The door had been silenced, so it didn't make too much noise when it was opened and closed. She watched the door close. She couldn't hear any footsteps outside. She didn't move and just stood there. Her heart couldn't resist Zhang Hao, and her body couldn't resist Zhang Hao either. But her rationality, her dignity, and everything else told her that she still had a bottom line. That was the bottom line that she wouldn't allow Zhang Hao to cross. She knew it clearly, but her legs still felt weak. She stood there and found that her heart was beating very fast. She didn't know how long had passed. It was probably 10 minutes, or maybe 20 minutes. She finally came back to her senses and left the private room. There was no one in the corridor. This shop was also interesting. There didn't seem to be many waiters, and there weren't many people either. How casual. Ha! She didn't meet Hu Jinyao and the others again. She went out and got into her car. She didn't see Zhang Hao, but she didn't care. She got into the car, started the car, and left quickly. When she got home, she couldn't fall asleep after sleeping for the whole afternoon. She went into the study and drew out all her previous ideas. When the hour hand pointed to 12 o'clock, she finally finished drawing all her ideas. Before she got up and went to bed, she looked in the direction of the living room. There was no one, and there was no sound. That night, she didn't hear any more knocks on the door. That man. He should have left. When she returned to her room, she realized that the bed sheets and quilts had been changed. Some of the traces inside had also been cleaned up. She hadn't noticed it before, but when she went to the balcony outside, she unexpectedly saw the bed sheets there. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and stared at the bed sheets for a long time. Finally, she returned to her bed to sleep. The bed sheets and quilts that she had put away earlier were all dried. There was a faint smell of laundry detergent. The only thing that wasn't there was the mint smell of that man. She pulled up the blanket to cover her head, but in the end, she felt stuffy and had no choice but to get out again. Sleep. It would be best if he didn't come. She told herself. Jean Hauser really didn't come again. Time passed by more than half a month later. In the past half a month, Su Qingsang came back and she went to Su Qingsang's house a few times. With Xiang Kaiping there, her mood was much better. Xiang Kaiping was a magical person. She had a kind of reassuring power. She liked to spend time with Xiang Kaiping. There was no burden or purpose. She was like a kind elder. She just didn't expect that such an elder would have an accident. She only found out later that Xiang Kaiping had been in a car accident. The cause of the accident was Su Peijian. She didn't like that woman before. Although Su Peijian didn't cause any real harm to Su Qingsang, she had always looked down on Su Qingsang and her attitude was quite arrogant. If she really didn't like Su Qingsang, she could have asked Su Qinghui to kick Su Qingsang out or break off their relationship. But she didn't have that ability, and she wouldn't do such a thing. But she always liked to make things difficult for Su Qingsang. These were not the main point. The main point was that Xiang Kaiping was injured, and it was her lumbar spine that was almost paralyzed. She went to the hospital to accompany Xiang Kaiping for 2 days in a row. Because she was worried about Xiang Caiping's injury, she didn't have the mood to care about where Jean Hauser went or what he was doing during the time he disappeared. Until a few days before the new year. Shi Mengwan had originally planned to wait until the spring festival before returning home. However, her younger sister, Shi Mingru, called and said that there was trouble at home again. She hurriedly handed over the matters of Xiao Qiu's studio and rushed home. This wasn't the first time they had caused a ruckus. Mom didn't give birth to a son, so Grandma always said that this family was incomplete. In the past, he always wanted his mother to have a third child. Later, when the doctor told her that her mother had hurt her body when giving birth to Shi Mingru and that it would be difficult for her to get pregnant, Grandma gave up. In addition, Shi Mingwan's disappearance made Shi Mingwan's father give up on the idea of having another son. However, it was useless for Shi Mingwan's father to dismiss it. Shi Mingwan's grandmother refused. She had never given up and wanted Shi Mingwan's father to have another child. Later, he saw that he could not persuade him. She brought up the old matter again and asked Shi Mingwan's father to adopt Shi Mingwan's uncle's son. Shi Mingwan's 2 uncles both had 2 sons, so one of them could be adopted. However, Shi Mengwan didn't agree. Her home, the home she believed in, was only her younger sister, and her parents. She didn't want a 5th person. Moreover, her uncle's cousins weren't young anymore. The youngest was already in his teens. After being raised to this age, he couldn't be brought along. In addition, she didn't like the attitude of her 2 uncles and aunts who thought that having a son was amazing. She had always opposed this matter. Her attitude was too domineering, and her parents couldn't do anything about it. Naturally, they would listen to her on this matter. However, Grandma would come to the house every few days to cause trouble. She wouldn't give up until she achieved her goal. Her youngest uncle's youngest son was 11 years old this year. He also wanted to adopt his eldest uncle's family so that he could live a better life. When Shi Mengwan returned home, she was anxious to explain this matter. Other than Xiao Qiu, no one knew that she had returned to her hometown. Grandma was already 81 years old. She was an old lady from the countryside and was in good health. When Shi Mengwan returned home, she heard her grandmother scolding her mother. Shi Mengwan's mother's surname was Chen. Back then, she was also a famous beauty in the surrounding villages. Even though she was old, her charm was still there. Shi Mengwan's mother was at the door, listening to her mother-in-law scold her for being a hen that couldn't lay eggs. She had heard this for more than 10 years and was already immune to it. However, Shi Mengwan couldn't take it anymore. She hurriedly got out of the car and rushed into the courtyard. Seeing the neighbors attracted by her grandmother's loud voice, she was furious. "Grandma, if my mother is a hen that can't lay eggs, then what are we? You little girl, you still know how to come back." When Grandma Shi saw her, she became even angrier. "You're quite impressive. You know how to run off to enjoy life and leave this family to your parents." "What? Did I say something wrong? Do you want to say that you're right?" After what happened back then, Shi Mengwan wasn't afraid of anyone. She was even more fearless. "My mother gave birth to me and my sister, so why can't she lay eggs? If my family didn't have my mother, would we be living such a good life now? I just don't understand. Grandma, you're already so old. Why can't you calm down and enjoy your old age? Why do you have to get involved in the affairs of the younger generation? You little heartless one. How can you speak to your elders like that?" "Ha!" Grandma Shi was angry, but Shi Mengwan wasn't afraid of her. If you want to be filial and respectful to your elders, you have to be worthy of being filial and respectful to your elders. All these years, how has my mother treated Grandma? Doesn't Grandma know? Is it fun for you to force my mother like this every day? How am I forcing your mother? I'm doing it for her own good. Let me tell you, I'm finding someone to send her off. She'll thank me in the future. Yes, thank you. Thank you for letting her raise someone else's son, right?" Chapter 664. Grandma Shi was old, but she lived in a small place and worked all year round. Her body was very strong. Her palm was wide and rough. With this slap, Shi Mengwan's face would definitely swell. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth and stood there, not wanting to back down at all. Mother Shi, who had been silent all this time, finally came over. She quickly pulled Grandma Shi's hand away and pulled Shi Mengwan behind her. "Mom, if there's anything you want to say, then say it. It's rare for Nan Nan to come back, must you act like this? I'll talk nicely. Why didn't I say it properly? After so many years, have you given birth to a son for Master? Ha! It's for your own good that I let you adopt third brother's family. What's wrong? Do you really have to be so ungrateful? Mom! Grandma, how can I appreciate it? Tell me." Shi Mengwan stood behind Mother Shi and was so angry that she almost laughed. "Cousin is already 11 this year, right? If he had known who his parents were, he would have let my mom adopt him. Would my mom be close to him? If they couldn't be related, what was there to adopt? Raising someone else's son. Besides, my mom is fine now. She has a daughter, why would she want to adopt someone else's son?" Grandma Shi was furious and pointed at Shi Mengwan. "How can a son and a daughter be the same? Let me tell you, a son has to carry on the family line. Can you? Why can't I? Shi Mengwan took a step forward. Grandma, let me tell you, I'm just going to invite a man to my house and let my child's surname be Shi. What's wrong with that? As soon as he said that, the neighbors who were watching the fun all gasped. Even Mother Shi looked at Shi Mengwan in shock. Wan, what nonsense are you talking about? Shi Mingru was young, but she could tell from the reactions of the people around her that what Shi Mengwan said was very impressive. She looked at Shi Mengwan worriedly. Mom, I'm not talking nonsense. Shi Mengwan turned around and looked at her mother's face, which was no longer young. All these years, Mom had sacrificed so much for this family. But all these couldn't compare to the sin of not giving birth to a son in Grandma's eyes. She couldn't take it anymore. She turned around and looked at Grandma Shi. Grandma, I'm looking for a son-in-law. The child I gave birth to will be surnamed Shi. This way, it can be considered as carrying on the bloodline of the Shi family, right? Me what? Can't I? I think it's a good idea. Shi Mengwan stood there with a determined look on her face. There are so many families that don't have daughters. It's not like they're all cut off. It wasn't like there had never been such a thing. If I recruit one, what do you think, Grandma? If you have the ability to get one and give birth to a child with the surname Shi, that will naturally count. Okay, Grandma said that. Shi Mengwan wanted to hear that. I hope Grandma won't go back on her words in the future. Grandma Shi was rendered speechless by her. In the end, she nodded vigorously. Okay. That's fine too. I would like to see which man would agree to such a thing. As she spoke, Grandma Shi sneered. Do you think you can find such a good man? Willing to marry into his family? And you're even willing to let your child have your surname? Zhang Hao's face flashed across Shi Mengwan's mind. For a moment, she was also uncertain. However, even if she lost in person, she wouldn't lose in spirit. At this time, she definitely wouldn't admit defeat. Yes. I'll find it. If I find it. Grandma, can you stop mentioning the matter of my parents adopting a son? Okay. If you can do it, I won't mention the matter of adoption anymore. As Grandma Shi spoke, she glanced at Shi Mengwan with obvious contempt in her eyes. But you can't keep looking, right? What if you can't find it, or you're using the delaying method to deceive an old woman like me? Then what do you want, Grandma? We need to set a time. Grandma Shi thought for a moment. 1 year. I'll give you 1 year. If you can find a man who agrees to be a son-in-law and is willing to give birth to a child with your surname, I won't mention the matter of adoption anymore. 1 year. Shi Mengwan thought of Zhang Hao again. She bit her lip and closed her eyes. Grandma, I don't even have a boyfriend right now. You said you'll only give me 1 year. Where can I find one? Especially with such a condition, it'll take at least 3 to 5 years, right? 3 to 5 years. I don't know if I'll live to that day. Grandma Shi sneered as if she had seen through Shi Mengwan's thoughts. You want to drag it out until I die? Shi Mengwan, there's no such thing. The neighbors whispered among themselves. Many people looked at Shi Mengwan and agreed with her grandmother's words. They felt that she was deliberately stalling for time. 2 years. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth and went all out. Grandma, 2 years. Within 2 years, I'll definitely find a man who's willing to be a son-in-law and let the child be born with my surname. When the time comes, you can't mention the matter of adoption anymore. Okay. Grandma Shi nodded and looked at Shi Mengwan from head to toe. Her gaze was really uncomfortable. However, Shi Mengwan didn't mind. Instead, she stood there openly for her to see, and also for the other neighbors to see. She would do what she said. These people were all witnesses. "One girl, your abilities have gradually grown over the years. I'll wait. I'd like to see if you can find the man you're talking about in 2 years." She snorted. Grandma Sher, who had achieved her goal, walked out of the courtyard door. She despised Shi Mingwan's mother for not having a son, so she didn't want to live with her eldest son's family. Instead, she stayed at her second son's house. The neighbors who had come to watch the show had also finished watching the show, so they all dispersed. Mother Shi looked at her daughter with an anxious expression. "Wan, how could you agree to something like this? In this society, which man would be willing to be a son-in-law? If there really was such a man, he would definitely be a man without much ability or with very poor conditions. Which man with good conditions would be willing?" Although Shi Mingru was only 13 years old, she looked at Shi Mengwan worriedly. "Yes. Sister. How could you tell Grandma such a condition?" "It's okay. I know what I'm doing." Mother Shi looked troubled. She wanted to persuade her again, but Father Shi had already returned. He went to a wedding in another city today and heard about what happened at home as soon as he came back. He didn't even have time to stop the car and quickly got out of the car. He first looked at his wife and daughter, then his gaze fell on Shi Mengwan. "Wan. Are you okay?" "Dad, I'm fine." Shi Mengwan had complicated feelings about her father. She knew that he treated her mother very well, but sometimes, she still felt that he was a little too soft. At least on the matter regarding her grandmother, she really had some grievances. "Wan, I just heard that you agreed to your grandmother's condition." "What condition?" "Dad." Shi Mengwan wanted to say that it was fine, but Shi Mingru couldn't help it anymore. She repeated what Shi Mengwan said to Father Shi. Father Shi's face turned red with anger. He looked at Shi Mengwan. "I'll go find your grandmother. I'll tell her that I can't let you agree to such a thing." Even if his daughter was a girl, she was still the treasure in his palm. How could he watch his daughter live an unhappy life in the future? "Dad." Shi Mengwan looked at Father Shi with a calm expression. "I'm serious. Dad, don't go find Grandma. Even if you can make Grandma give up today, she will bring it up in the future. Since that's the case, you might as well listen to me. At least, Grandma will give us 2 years of peace." "But..." Father Shi looked at Shi Mengwan, his eyes full of heartache. "When 2 years are up, are you really going to recruit a man?" "Why not?" Shi Mengwan didn't think that what she was doing was wrong. "I think it's pretty good." Wan. Mother Shi wanted to say something but hesitated. She looked troubled. "You don't understand. How can things be as easy as you think? You might have forgotten about the aunt from your third aunt's-in-law's family." Mother Shi glanced at Father Shi and was very helpless. Her family didn't have a son, so they got a son-in-law. But that son-in-law said that he was recruited and that it was fine if he ate, drank, and didn't work. In the end, he even went out to find a woman. He said that the child he gave birth to didn't take his surname anyway, so it couldn't be considered his. Yes. Father Shi sighed as well. He knew about that cousin. Your aunt was tormented by that man and passed away before she was 50. Wan, it's not that I don't want you to find a son-in-law, but there's really no man in this world who's willing. Mom, Dad, stop talking. I know what to do. Don't worry, I'll definitely find a suitable man. Shi Mengwan actually didn't believe it herself, but so what? Compared to her parents' difficulties, her sacrifice was nothing. After accompanying her parents for a night, Shi Mengwan tossed and turned on her bed at night, unable to fall asleep. She had agreed happily during the day, but she had forgotten about John Hauser. She had never thought of being with a man other than John Hauser, but she didn't know what John Hauser thought. She remembered that a long time ago, she had asked her dear brother about his parents. He coldly replied to her with 2 words, dead. She could feel the disdain dear brother had for his parents from his usual behavior. Since that was the case, was it possible that he would be willing to marry into the family? She suddenly sneered. Did John Hauser have a future with her? He had long forgotten everything that had happened between him and Gu Shizhou. He was no longer her dear brother. How could he have a future with her? Not to mention marrying into the family. Shi Mengwan tried her best to get rid of that thought and stop thinking about it. Before she fell asleep, her last thought in a daze was. She gave herself 2 years. In 2 years, if she couldn't win John Hauser's heart, if she couldn't make John Hauser fall in love with her, think of her, and be with her, then she would give up. Before that, she still had to work hard. Shi Mengwan only stayed at home for a day before returning to Lin City. It was the end of the year, and there were many banquets. Their studio was also busy. She focused all her attention on her work and went to see Xiang Kaiping when she had time. It was almost the new year, and she had to settle some things before the new year. A week before the new year, she saw John Hauser again. This time, he came with Qin Feifei. The moment Shi Mengwan saw John Hauser, she was stunned for a moment, but only for a moment. Miss Qin. Hello. Because Qin Feifei had specifically asked Shi Mengwan to serve her, Shi Mengwan could only cheer up and socialize with Qin Feifei. Hello. The weather was getting colder. Qin Feifei was wearing a rabbit fur top with Chanel's new winter clothes inside. The air conditioner was on in the room. She took off the top and handed it to John Hauser. Brother Hao, help me take it. Shi Mengwan used a lot of willpower to force herself not to say that they had a special place to hang VIP clothes. I have 2 cocktail parties to attend during the new year. I want you to help me choose 2 sets of dresses. There was a faint smile on Qin Feifei's face. She looked at Shi Mengwan with a friendly gaze, but if one looked carefully, one could see that there was a hint of wariness and displeasure in her eyes. Qin Feifei's appearance was the weak type. She looked so weak that she couldn't even stand the wind. She didn't like women who were too beautiful, especially people like Shi Mengwan. That was why she was willing to come to Song Seeking Studio. Why? Because she wanted to torment Shi Mengwan. So what if she was beautiful? She could only be a clothes maker. If Shi Mengwan knew what Qin Feifei was thinking, she would definitely be speechless. A fashion designer was not the same as a clothes maker. Miss Chen, our studio has launched a new cherry blossom series. There are a total of 9 styles in this cherry blossom series. You can take a look. Shi Mengwan's cherry blossom series was actually 10 pieces, but the first one was ordered by the client. The remaining 9 pieces. Although the styles were different, it could be seen that they were similar designs. However, the details of each piece were handled differently. Cherry blossom series. Qin Feifei's eyes lit up. Okay, let me take a look. Shi Mengwan brought her to try on the clothes. From the beginning to the end, she didn't glance at John Hauser. Qin Feifei really liked the cherry blossom series. She looked at the clothes and thought of one thing. Miss Shi, you said that there was only one design for each of these clothes, right? Yes. Shi Mengwan nodded. I can guarantee that there won't be a second set of these clothes. All the clothes she designed had a specially created logo with the dark pattern of Song Seeking Studio on it. It was inside the clothes. Then, look. Although these styles are different, I can tell that they are from the same series. If I buy them and others buy them too, won't I be wearing the same clothes as others? It doesn't matter. Shi Mengwan explained patiently, this is a series to begin with. More importantly, we handle the details differently, so there won't be the problem you mentioned. Chen Feifei didn't say anything. She seemed to have thought of something. How about this, I want all 9 pieces. You're not allowed to make the same style again. I don't want to wear the same clothes as others. Okay. Shi Mengwan had nothing to say when she met such a straightforward customer. It was one thing to not like Chen Feifei. She would be a fool not to earn money. Chen Feifei tried on one of them and then went out to look for Zhang Haoze. Brother Hao, you've been waiting for me for a long time, right? I've picked out the clothes. What do you think? An extremely light gradual color change, from light pink to dark pink, layer by layer. The thin silk fabric fluttered, and the dark cherry blossom patterns on it danced along with the hem of the skirt. If one looked carefully, it seemed like petals were flying. Zhang Haoze glanced at the clothes, then nodded and softly grunted. What do you mean by, Does it look good or not? Chen Feifei hooked Zhang Haoze's arm with a charming face. Zhang Haoze looked at her hand that was hooking his arm. He took a step back to look at the clothes and pulled her hand away without a trace. Not bad. Chen Feifei smiled and finally went to change in satisfaction. She went to change, but Shi Mengwan didn't follow. She stood there and glanced at Zhang Haoze's face. There was a flash of mockery and disappointment in her eyes. She was actually thinking about working hard for 2 years. Now it seemed that she didn't need to work hard for 2 years. Zhang Haoze already had a choice. Not wanting to pay attention to Zhang Haoze, Shi Mengwan turned around and walked in Chen Feifei's direction. Zhang Haoze's voice sounded behind her. The clothes aren't bad. The sudden 4 words made Shi Mengwan stop in her tracks. She turned around and glanced at Zhang Haoze. Zhang Haoze was also looking at her. He cleared his throat. When I said not bad, I meant the clothes aren't bad. After Shi Mengwan realized what he meant, the corners of her lips couldn't help but curl up. I want you to say it. If she didn't have some real ability, how could she have made Song Seeking Studio famous in Lin City in such a short period of time? The expression on her face was full of confidence and arrogance. She was beautiful to begin with, but she was charming but extraordinary, gorgeous but not seductive. Zhang Haoze's eyes darkened slightly. His gaze suddenly changed. Shi Mengwan saw through his club. She lowered her head and turned to walk towards the fitting room. Chen Feifei picked out the 9 gowns and 2 pairs of shoes. Other than clothes, they also had shoes and bags for fear that customers wouldn't have the direction to match them. The price wasn't comparable to that of first-year brands, but it wasn't something that ordinary people could afford. Shi Mengwan didn't give Chen Feifei a discount. She watched as Zhang Haoze took out his card to pay. She really wanted to charge twice as much, but in the end, she decided against it. After Zhang Haoze left, Xiao Ji, Xiao Qiu, and a few other designers heard about the excessive order today. The group of people were very happy. It was almost the new year. Although the studio's business was very good, who would complain about having more money? Shi Mengwan looked at her subordinates and thought about how she didn't give Chen Feifei a discount just now. She generously expressed that this year's year-end bonus would be given for 1 more month. Amidst the cheers of her subordinates, Shi Mengwan returned to the office, but her face was no longer as happy as before. She sat behind her desk and thought about the moment when Zhang Haoze took out his card to pay today. She actually wanted to question him, but later, she didn't know what she could ask. Her eyes were a little swollen and sore. She took a deep breath. That moment of discomfort gave her inspiration again. She pressed the internal line and told Xiao Ji that she was going to draw. After telling them not to disturb her, Shi Mengwan began to draw. This time, she chose a blue background color. Blue represented melancholy. It was just like her current mood. She lost track of time as she drew. When she was done with the things in front of her, she went downstairs and planned to go home. However, she found John Hauser standing next to her car. He had an unlit cigarette in his hand. Seeing that she had come, he threw the cigarette into the trash can beside him. Shi Mengwan looked around. It was already very late. At this time, there was no one else in the business district that she was in. She didn't quite understand why Jean Hauser was here, so she went straight into the car. Just as she sat down, the car door on the other side was opened, and Jean Hauser got in. Shi Mengwan's expression didn't look too good. "Jean Hauser, please get out of the car." "What? You're not calling me President John anymore." Previously in the studio, she had called him President John. Jean Hauser's words made Shi Mengwan grit her teeth. "Jean Hauser, at this time, you should be accompanying Miss Chin, right?" "She doesn't need me to accompany her." "Yeah, she doesn't need you to accompany her, so you came to find me?" "Jean Hauser, can you be any more outrageous?" Shi Mengwan misunderstood the meaning of his words. She couldn't help but mind Qin Feifei's existence and Jean Hauser's attitude. Without giving Jean Hauser a chance to speak, her attitude was quite cold. "Get out of the car." Jean Hauser looked at her. When she was angry, her lips parted slightly. The lights in the country weren't very bright. The street lights outside shone in, causing Shi Mengwan's face to glow. He thought of her smile today. It was a different look from her current coldness, but it was still as beautiful. "Get out of the car," Shi Mengwan said again. Jean Hauser moved at this moment. He reached out his hand. Just when Shi Mengwan thought that he was going to push the car door, he turned around, stretched out his long arms, and pulled her into his arms. He lowered his head and easily kissed her lips. The space in the car was narrow. Although the handbrake of the car was between the two of them. Instead, it made their lips press even tighter. Ever since Jean Hauser left her apartment on New Year's Day, it had been almost a month since the two of them had seen each other. Shi Mengwan didn't want to admit it, but she had to. She missed Jean Hauser's kiss and his embrace. His lips, his hands, his kiss, and his touch made her body go soft. His kiss was too domineering and forceful, making her almost unable to breathe. In the almost suffocating kiss, Jean Hauser finally let go of her. Shi Mengwan panted heavily, but she almost couldn't sit still in her seat. If it weren't for the back of the chair behind her, she might have already slid down. She glared at Jean Hauser. When she met his deep black eyes, she weakly retracted her gaze. She clearly wanted to chase him away, but she always lost her mind in his kiss. This Jean Hauser was really her nemesis. No matter how unwilling Shi Mengwan was, no matter how she chased Jean Hauser out of the car. In the end, she brought Jean Hauser home again. She was so upset that she didn't notice that when she jumped up, Jean Hauser's gaze fell on her like a hungry wolf. It was filled with a predatory aura. As soon as she entered the door, Shi Mengwan's body was held in Jean Hauser's arms. He searched for her lips almost eagerly. Shi Mengwan's lips hurt from his strength. Her coat, clothes, and pants fell off one by one. They walked along the living room until the room. Shi Mengwan had just entered the door and hadn't had time to turn on the air conditioner. The moment her skin came into contact with the air, she was so cold that she shivered slightly. Chapter 665. At the same time that her body became hot, Shi Mengwan wrapped her arms around Jean Hauser's neck and looked into his eyes. She had long since discovered that Jean Hauser's eyes were darker than those of ordinary Asians. Most Asians' eyes had a hint of light brown in them. But John House's eyes weren't. His eyes were pure black. They were like a pair of extremely beautiful obsidian eyes. Every time he was aroused, the color of his eyes would become deeper and deeper. Like a deep spring, she often couldn't help but indulge in it. Not only now, but a long time ago, she liked to look at her dear brother's eyes. She thought that he was really her calamity. She could talk and laugh freely with difficult clients, and she could face her tricky grandmother with a strong attitude. She could even play tricks and make Xiang Kaiping happy. However, she couldn't be more at ease in front of Jean Hauser. Every time she saw him, she always felt at a loss. The face in front of her overlapped with that of her dear brother. Shi Mengwan couldn't help but call him dear brother again. Jean Hauser, who was trying his best to move on her body, became more and more aroused. In the end, he bumped into her until she couldn't speak anymore. When her consciousness shattered, she naturally couldn't call out the words big brother anymore. After Shi Mengwan told Qiao Zhe about it, she felt that what Qiao Zhe said before might be true. He really had something to do, so he left early and returned late. Because after that day, Qiao Zhe returned home early every day, had dinner with her, and woke up early for breakfast together. After the first month, the temperature in Lin City slowly rose. Shi Mengwan grew a little taller. She could no longer wear her previous clothes. In the past few months, some of the clothes she wore were bought by Qiao Zhe, and some were directly picked up by her. Her mother used to know how to make clothes and was the only tailor in the town at that time. Shi Mengwan watched her mother step on the sewing machine since she was young. Not to mention that she knew how to make clothes, she still knew how to simply change clothes and hold a needle and thread. Qiao Zhe also grew very fast. After the new year, he seemed to have grown a few centimeters taller. When he grew taller, he looked even thinner. Some of the clothes in the closet, such as t-shirts, shirts, and jeans, couldn't be worn anymore. Shi Mengwan took them over and made them smaller for herself to wear. Qiao Zhe once laughed at her. "Are you planning to be a tailor when you grow up?" "No." Shi Mengwan shook her head. "I don't want to be a tailor. I want to be a fashion designer." "Isn't he a tailor?" The young man had never come into contact with it before, so he started joking. Shi Mengwan was unusually serious. "No, a tailor is a tailor, and a fashion designer is a fashion designer. I've checked both of them. This is different." The girl's eyes were clear and bright. She did not back down when talking about her dream. The youth stared at the clothes in her hands. However, he stopped mocking him. "All right. It was different. I'm waiting for you to be a fashion designer." Shi Mengwan's eyes curved with an obvious smile. "You trust me that much?" "Trust me." Just by looking at the stitches she had sewn and the clothes she had changed, there was nothing wrong with them. There was nothing for him to doubt. Shi Mengwan smiled, but that smile didn't last long. She thought of something else. Right now, she was hanging out with Qiao Zhe every day. She didn't go home or go to school. Being a fashion designer was just a joke. She had to at least go back and finish her studies. But when she thought of Grandma Shi and the messy things at home, she didn't want to go back. "What's wrong?" The youth looked at her with a pair of bright eyes. When he met the sadness in Shi Mengwan's eyes, he seemed to understand something. "Do you not want to stay here anymore?" "Dear brother." Shi Mengwan was shocked when she heard this. "Are you trying to chase me away? If you don't want to stay, then go home. You're different from me." Shi Mengwan had parents. She only ran away from home in a fit of pique with her family. Qiao Zhe already knew about this. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and finally shook her head. "I don't want to go back." If you don't go back, how are you going to school? How are you going to be your fashion designer? I don't know. After all, she was only a little over 12 years old. How could she think about so much? Dear brother, can you not chase me away? The youth wasn't moved by her words. Instead, he was very serious. You have to know that if you follow me, you might not be able to fulfill your dream. Shi Mingwan's expression was conflicted. She knew in her heart that what the youth said was true. But she looked at the youth. Under the light, the youth's eyes were as dark as ink, making people drown in them. Dear brother, I won't chase you away. When the youth realized his feelings for her, how could he bear to chase her away? But you have to think clearly. If you follow me, you won't have a good life. Not to mention the current environment, just what he was going to do in the future would probably be more and more dangerous. He couldn't say it clearly, but did she really understand? I'm not afraid. Shi Mengwan still hadn't realized her subtle thoughts. She only knew that she didn't want to leave her dear brother just like that. So silly. Qiao Zhe looked at her and felt that the girl was a little silly. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and suddenly put down the t-shirt in her hand. She reached out and hugged Qiao Zhe. Dear brother, I want to follow you. I don't want to go back. Even if their life was actually quite hard now, even if she had nothing here, she had her dear brother. She didn't have an elder brother in the past. Although Father Shi treated her well, that feeling was different. Shi Mingwan's slender body was soft, and there was a faint fragrance of a young girl on her body. The youth's ears quietly turned red. He almost didn't dare to look at the girl. If you don't want to go back, then don't go back. It was just a few simple words, but he said them in an exceptionally stiff manner. Shi Mengwan didn't notice. She only felt that she was happy because the youth didn't chase her away. She was still too young to know why she was so happy. Shi Mengwan opened her eyes and felt a hand on her waist. The blanket had slid down a lot, but she didn't feel cold. The air conditioner in the room had been turned on at some point, but she didn't notice it. Following the hand, she saw that Zhang Haoze was still sleeping with his eyes closed. She thought of the dream just now. The young man's thin but strong chest. She hugged him. He was clearly still very thin and weak. He was clearly just a young man, but he gave her a full sense of security. She looked up at Zhang Haoze. The feeling he gave her was still the same, but she didn't know if this feeling was only given to her or to other women. She knew that this was because she was different from him. Gently taking his hand away, Shi Mengwan got up and went to the bathroom. When she left home before, Mother Shi was afraid that she wouldn't be able to take care of herself in Lin City alone, so she asked her to bring a lot of food over. Among them were dumplings and wontons that Mother Shi had personally made. They were all frozen and packaged. She told her that if she was too lazy to cook in the future, she could just cook them directly. Shi Mengwan looked at it and decided to cook wontons. She was very good at doing these things, so she cooked them very quickly. When Zhang Haoze came out of the room, he saw two sets of wontons on the table, one big and one small. Shi Mengwan glanced at him. Let's eat. Her voice was very calm, without a trace of emotion. Zhang Haoze sat down opposite her and looked at the wonton in front of him, which was almost twice as big as the one in front of Shi Mengwan. You eat. After you eat, I have something to tell you. Shi Mengwan felt self-loathing and disgust for being immersed in Zhang Haoze's embrace again. She had conflicting emotions. On one hand, she couldn't control it, but on the other hand, she felt that it was inappropriate. Being conflicted on both sides would only make things difficult for herself. When Zhang Haoze heard that, he paused in his action of picking up his chopsticks. He glanced at Shi Mengwan, but she lowered her head and didn't look at him. Mother Sher's cooking skills were very good, and the wontons she made were very delicious. It was different from the ones sold outside. Sher Mingwan's speed was very fast. She had the inspiration yesterday, and that feeling was still there today. She wanted to finish drawing her design in one go. After the new year, there would be a fashion design competition in France. She wanted to try it out. Although a small studio like theirs had almost no chance of winning such a competition, her teacher especially appreciated her and gave her an invitation. Behind the invitation was a design drawing. It was first sent to the other party's competition committee, and then the competition committee would pick out the shortlisted works from these works. If they were shortlisted, they would have a chance. There was still a month before the submission of the initial works for the competition. Sher Mengwan wanted to send the works that she thought of yesterday to the competition. She had something on her mind, so she ate very quickly. After finishing the wonton in front of her, she realized that John Hauser was still eating. She put down the bowl, sat up straight, and looked at John Hauser seriously. John Hauser, after this breakfast, don't come again. John Hauser raised his head and glanced at her. Sher Mengwan didn't need him to speak, nor did she need him to respond. You have Chen Feifei. I don't want to be a mistress. Everything we did before was wrong. Yes, in this matter, I admit that I also have a responsibility. But I also paid the price. You didn't suffer a loss. So let's just leave it at that. Let's end it here. There are some things that you and I both know, so let's just leave it at that. When she faced John Hauser, her aura was always a little weaker. She didn't want to continue like this. She needed to end such a mistake. John Hauser didn't speak. Instead, he listened to her. He finished the rest of the wontons. He took out a tissue and wiped the corner of his lips. I've said it before. Chen Feifei isn't my girlfriend, nor is she my fiancée. Really? John Hauser knew that Sher Mengwan wouldn't believe him. There were some things that he couldn't say more about. She has nothing to do with me. I just treat her as a sister. You're not a mistress. After knowing her for so long, this was the most serious explanation John Hauser had ever given. Sher Mengwan looked into his eyes. For a moment, she was almost willing to believe that what he said was true. But it was only for a moment. You treat her as a sister. What about her? John Hauser frowned. That's her business. Okay. Sher Mengwan skipped over this. John Hauser, you said that Chen Feifei has nothing to do with you. What about me? Seeing that John Hauser didn't seem to understand what she meant, she smiled. Chen Feifei has nothing to do with you, but what about me? In your heart, what am I? There was silence. John Hauser looked at Sher Mengwan's face as if it was very difficult for him to answer. Why aren't you saying anything? Sher Mengwan sneered and looked at the troubled expression on John Hauser's face. John Hauser, I admit that I have feelings for you. But I definitely won't let myself be a mistress, and I won't let myself become so lowly in love. I didn't mean that. He had never looked down on her. You didn't mean that. You didn't want me to be a mistress. Or do you not think of me as a prostitute? John Hauser frowned. I've said it before. I didn't mean that. Okay. I'll pretend that you didn't. Sher Mengwan stood up and placed her hands on the table. She leaned over and looked him in the eye. So you're serious about dating me? John Hauser pursed his lips into a straight line and didn't refute her words. John Hauser, can you marry me? Sher Mengwan leaned forward a little more and stared straight at John Hauser's face. She was especially serious. John Hauser, are you willing to marry me? Marry me. You know, after the new year, I'll be 26 years old. I also want to get married and start a family with a man. Are you willing? Jean Hauser was stunned for a moment. This time, he was really silent. Shi Mengwan seemed to know the answer. She smiled and nodded. Look, you don't want to, there was no need to say anything else. Shi Mengwan took the bowl in front of him and cleaned up the bowl in front of her. She turned around and went into the kitchen. She cleaned up the kitchen in no time. When she came out, she saw that Jean Hauser was still sitting at the dining table and hadn't moved. She didn't care. She went back to her room, changed her clothes, picked up her coat, and prepared to leave. When she walked to the door, Jean Hauser had already stood up from the dining table and walked in front of her. He didn't take any further action, but Shi Mengwan didn't mind continuing to speak more decisively. Jean Hauser, the next time I come, I'll call the police. You're considered a reputable person in Lin City now. I think you don't want to lose face, right? She picked up the car key and opened the door. More importantly, I believe that you don't want Miss Chen Feifei to know, right? The moment she was about to step out, Jean Hauser suddenly reached out and grabbed her hand. Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. In the next second, her body was pulled into Jean Hauser's arms. He lowered his head to kiss her. She avoided him. The coat in her hand fell to the ground, and she pressed her hand tightly against his chest. Jean Hauser, don't always use this trick on me. I'm really not that cheap. Jean Hauser was stunned for a moment. He watched as she picked up the coat and keys that had fallen to the ground and carried the bag on her back. Before Jean Hauser could react, she had already stepped out of the door and left. She moved very quickly. When she walked outside, the elevator happened to arrive. She didn't care about Jean Hauser and went straight into the elevator. Jean Hauser didn't chase after her. Shi Mengwan heaved a sigh of relief, but at the same time, she felt very disappointed. She already knew the answer to some things, and she also understood that there was no outcome between her and Jean Hauser. But knowing it was one thing, accepting it and slowly digesting it was another thing. Leaning against the elevator mirror wall, she told herself that it was okay. It would pass, everything would pass. In the next few days, Jean Hauser didn't come again. Since Shi Mengwan planned to participate in the fashion design competition, she naturally had to prepare well. She told herself to temporarily put Jean Hauser at the back of her mind and focus on drawing. Occasionally, when she was free, she would go to the hospital to accompany Xiang Kaiping. The studio was already on holiday. It was different from ordinary companies. For companies like them, the orders were all processed in advance. During the New Year period, there weren't many guests. Therefore, Shi Mengwan was quite generous and allowed her subordinates to rest until after the Lantern Festival before coming to work. The New Year was in 2 days. Hua Ji now had something to do in Rong City, so he went back to Rong City first. Su Qingsang didn't go back because she had to take care of Xiang Kaiping. Her good friend had to take care of her mother in the hospital. Shi Mengwan thought about it and suggested that she come over to take care of Xiang Kaiping on the first day of the New Year. However, she was rejected by Su Qingsang and Xiang Kaiping, especially Su Qingsang. She knew that Shi Mengwan usually didn't go home much, so she wanted her to hurry home for the New Year. Shi Mengwan couldn't argue with Su Qingsang, and Mother Shi kept calling her. In the end, she went home. The New Year in the small town was very lively. They started preparing a long time in advance. Father Shi was the eldest in the family. On New Year's Eve, Shi Mengwan's 2 uncles and an aunt would come to their house for a reunion dinner. Shi Mengwan's second uncle had 2 sons and a daughter. Shi Mengwan's third uncle also had 2 sons and a daughter. Shi Mingwan's aunt had 2 daughters and a son. In addition to her aunt, uncle, and Grandma Shi, there were 2 tables full of people in the living room. Mother Shi was cooking in the kitchen, while Shi Mengwan went into the kitchen to help. Mother Shi chased her out a few times, but she wasn't willing to go out. She would rather sit under the stove and light the fire than see the pride on her second uncle, second aunt, and third uncle's faces. Speaking of which, all these years, the 2 uncles and aunts always felt that they were superior to Mother Shi because they had sons. Shi Mengwan didn't like to be bullied. In fact, among the 3rd generation of grandchildren, be it the children of uncles or aunts, there was really no one like her who could open a studio at such a young age and earn money to buy a house. But so what? Just because she wasn't a son, no matter how well she did, she wouldn't get a good word from Grandma Shi. How ridiculous. Your grandmother is old. It's already 82 years after the new year. If she says anything, don't take it to heart. With the incident of Shi Mingwan's return last time, Grandma Shi hadn't mentioned it again recently. She only occasionally mentioned it in a strange tone. Mother Shi didn't plan to argue with her. After all, she was an elder. Got it. Shi Mengwan nodded, picked up a piece of firewood, and threw it into the stove. She looked up at Mother Shi. Mom, how about I take you to Lin City to live? What nonsense are you talking about? Mother Shi didn't answer. What can we do if we go? We're used to staying in the countryside. It's not like we haven't been to Lin City before. It's not suitable for us. When Shi Mingwan's house had just been renovated and moved in, she had also asked Father Shi and Mother Shi to stay there for a few days, but the 2 of them weren't used to it. Later, they came back. How is it nonsense? How is it not suitable? Look, you guys are still burning this earthen stove. How inconvenient. Everything is convenient in Lin City now. Besides, your daughter can earn money now. I'll support you guys. It's only right for you to support your parents. But I think that your parents will be happier when you bring the man you mentioned back. The sudden voice made Shi Mengwan turn around and look at the kitchen door. Grandma Shi stood at the door and sneered at Shi Mengwan. One girl, you said that you wanted to find a son-in-law. It's the new year. Where's your son-in-law? Shi Mengwan's expression didn't look good. Grandma, you still know that it's the new year. She clearly knew that it was the new year, yet she still said such words. It really made people uncomfortable to hear it. Yeah, isn't it the new year to get married? You said that you want to find a son-in-law, so why don't you bring that person over? Grandma is old, so I think your memory isn't very good. Didn't you say you would give me 2 years? It hasn't even been 2 months, right? Humph, of course, Grandma Shi knew what she had said. But when she went back that day, the more she thought about it, the more she felt that she had fallen for Shi Mingwan's trick. What 2 years? She was already 82 years old. Who knew how many more days she could live? What if she died and this damn girl still hadn't brought him back? Who would care about the boss's business then? Mom. Mother Shi looked at Grandma Shi and was a little helpless. There's a lot of smoke in this kitchen. You should go sit outside first. Besides, it's the new year today, and Wan is still helping me keep the fire lit. She's usually tired from work, so don't mention that for now. Do you think I like to mention it? Tired from work. So what if she's tired from work? Let me tell you, no matter how well a girl does, it's not as practical as finding a man to marry. Grandma Shi snorted at Shi Mengwan as she spoke, then turned around and left. Mother Shi knew that Shi Mengwan didn't like to hear this. She was afraid that Shi Mengwan would be unhappy, so she wanted to persuade her, but Shi Mengwan comforted her instead. Mom, don't worry. I'm not angry, and I won't argue with Grandma. It was the new year, and she would only be back for a few days. She didn't have the time to be angry with Grandma. Mother Shi looked at Shi Mengwan and thought about how she had been worried for the past half a month. She couldn't help but ask tentatively. Wan Wan, do you have a boyfriend now? Mom, what are you thinking? How can I have a boyfriend? She hid her expression by putting firewood into the stove. She really didn't have a boyfriend, but she couldn't help but think of Jean Hause. Jean Hause hadn't come to look for her for the past few days. He must have gotten to know her clearly, right? Wan Wan, I heard your uncle talk about someone last time. The other party's conditions aren't bad. I mentioned your request to her, but the other party didn't object. Why don't you meet him? Mom, was she asking her to go on a blind date? I'm serious. Mother Shi quickly explained, that person is from the county town. I heard that he's also working in Lin City. I heard that he's a manager. He has 3 sons, so he doesn't mind this kind of thing. Why don't you meet him? Mom, I'm not interested. But there aren't many who can agree to your request. Mother Shi scooped up the dishes and put them aside. She was really doing it for Shi Mengwan's sake. I think you can meet him. I heard that the boy is quite good-looking. Really, will you consider it? Mom. Shi Mengwan looked at the anxiety and worry on Mother Shi's face. In the end, she sighed helplessly. Chapter 666. Shi Mengwan believed that even if she had met him, she wouldn't be able to get along. But with Mother Shi's attitude, she would just meet him. She would just treat it as reassuring her mother. Of course, it's just a meeting. It's not like I'm asking you to get married immediately. There's no such logic. Shi Mengwan's lips moved, but she didn't say anything else. She didn't want to say it anymore. Forget it, she would just treat it as an additional life experience. Otherwise, she hadn't even gone on a blind date before. Thinking about it this way, she wasn't so resistant anymore. Shi Mengwan didn't expect Mother Shi to be so anxious. She actually asked the man to come to her house the next day, which was the first day of the new year, to see her. Shi Mengwan was helpless and speechless. It was just that it was the new year. If he really came, she was too embarrassed to push him out. She thought about it and really didn't like such an atmosphere. She used the excuse of going to her former classmate's house for New Year's greetings to avoid it. It was one thing to agree to the blind date, but she felt that it was too hasty to meet the blind date just like that. She wasn't prepared at all. Shi Mengwan didn't have many classmates in the town. There were only 2 from junior high school. She went to the county town to study in high school. At that time, she had just returned home and felt uncomfortable staying at home. Later, she went to the county town to study in high school. She hid at her classmate's house and found that the 2 former classmates were already married and had children. They were clearly about the same age as her. One of the female classmates kept asking her when she was planning to get married. News of her had spread throughout the entire town. Father Shi was very capable when he was young. Mother Shi was also a famous tailor in the area. The couple had built a 3.5-story building in the town a long time ago. They were also one of the first to get rich. The Shi family was so famous that many people heard about Shi Mengwan's quarrel with Grandma Shi that day. Half of the people thought that Shi Mengwan was really amazing, while the other half thought that Shi Mengwan was dreaming. Which good man would agree to be your son-in-law? Would the child have to take your surname? Shi Mengwan couldn't hear the discussions of those people, so she didn't know that she had become the female lead of the rumors. When she heard her classmate ask her when she was going to get married, the first thing she thought of was Jean Hause. Then, she thought of the blind date that was coming today. She shook her head and didn't answer the other party's question, but she couldn't stay any longer. She went to 2 more houses to pay their New Year's greetings. In the end, she kept asking similar questions. Shi Mengwan lost her patience and slowly headed home. When he got home, the guests had already left. Mother Shi's eyes were a little complicated, but she didn't blame him much. She probably knew that her daughter had a knot in her heart. When she came back, her daughter ran out every day, wholeheartedly wanting to find that big brother. Putting aside the fact that she couldn't find him under such circumstances, even if she found him, Mother Shi wouldn't agree to Shi Mengwan being with that boy. It was said that he didn't go to school and didn't have proper parents. No one knew what he was doing outside every day. But after so many years, even if his daughter didn't mention it, she probably still remembered it in her heart. Wan. Mother Shi really wanted to persuade her. I've seen the person who came today. He was a nice person. He was the 3rd child in the family. This was a gift left behind by the other party. I knew you weren't home, so I didn't say anything. I only said that I could meet you again when I got to Lin City. Oh. Mother Shi took out her phone and sent a phone number to Shi Mengwan. This is the other party's phone number. He said he would contact you when he returned to Lin City. Don't blame me for giving him his phone number. Also, he said that his Weibo signal is also this. He said that if you're willing, you can add his Weibo message first in chat first. Mom. Shi Mengwan was a little impatient. When she met her mother's gaze, she forced herself to be patient and memorize the number. Okay, I got it. I think Xiaoqi is really not bad. Think about it. Mother Shi gave a very serious suggestion. Shi Mengwan couldn't refuse her mother's kindness, so she copied down the other party's phone number. Shi Mengwan didn't stay at home for long. After staying for 3 days, she returned to Lin City. Firstly, she still wanted to go back to the studio to finish the rest of the work. Secondly, she still wanted to see Xiang Kaiping. Xiang Kaiping was still hospitalized during the New Year. The first thing she did when she returned to Lin City was to see Xiang Kaiping. She was in good spirits and didn't seem to be affected by the injury at all. She saw that Su Qingsang and Xiang Kaiping had a very good relationship. She also took good care of her. She was really happy for Su Qingsang. After having Xiang Kaiping, Su Qingsang was finally no longer a child without a mother. When she came out of the hospital, the weather was good. Shi Mengwan unexpectedly received a call from Xiaoqi. Xiaoqi was the blind date man. Shi Mengwan held the phone. The other party's voice sounded very gentle. Miss Shi, our company hasn't started work yet. I heard that you've already come to Lin City. When do you think it's convenient for you to come out and meet him in the next 2 days? The other party went straight to the point and didn't beat around the bush. Shi Mengwan thought for a moment and agreed to the other party's request to meet. The time was set for tonight. Xiaoqi knew how to set the mood and booked the dinner venue at a Western restaurant that had just opened. Shi Mengwan looked at the address. It was very close to where she lived. Mother Shi might have told Xiaoqi where she lived, but no matter what, if the other party had specially asked about it, it was considered thoughtful. She didn't have any resistance at first, but now, it was a little less. It was still early, so Shi Mengwan didn't go home to change her clothes. She went to the studio and made a plan for the new year. She also revised her previous draft. After she was done, she realized that there were less than 15 minutes left to eat. She rushed, but when she arrived at the restaurant, she realized that she was still late. She took out her phone and was about to make a call when Xiaoqi sent her a location and a photo. The location was the restaurant he was currently at, telling her that he had arrived. The photo was the restaurant's signboard. Below it were Xiaoqi's location, and there was also a selfie of him. This was the first time Shi Mengwan had seen this man. He looked gentle, and he seemed to be a very good-natured person. Shi Mengwan looked at the time. The other party had arrived a full 15 minutes earlier than her. She was a little embarrassed. She hurried into the restaurant and found a seat. Xiao Qi was already sitting in his seat with his phone in his hand. The moment he saw Shi Mengwan coming over, he stood up. He sized up Shi Mengwan, and there was an obvious flash of surprise in his eyes. I was just wondering if the photo I sent was too ugly, so you were so scared that you didn't want to appear. Shi Mengwan giggled. This Xiao Qi was a little interesting. How could that be? You should be thinking if it's because the photo you sent is too handsome that I feel ashamed of my inferiority, so I don't dare to appear. This time, it was Xiao Qi's turn to smile. He reached out his hand to Shi Mengwan. Hello, I'm Xiao Qi. Hello, I'm Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan smiled and reached out her hand to him. This man might not be so repulsive. He walked out of his seat and pulled out a chair for Shi Mengwan. He returned to his seat and sat down, pouring Shi Mengwan a glass of lemonade on the table. Sorry, I haven't ordered anything yet. I don't know what you like to eat, so I could only wait for you to come. It's okay. I'm not picky. What Shi Mengwan said was true. After more than a year of wandering, she really ate everything. Other than a few foods that she didn't like, she really ate whatever she had. Xiao Qi called the waiter over and asked Shi Mengwan for her opinion. He ordered 2 identical steaks for the 2 of them. Miss Shi, what drink do you want? As he spoke, he smiled. If you like to drink, you can also have a bottle. However, I saw that you drove here, so you should drink a drink. I'll just drink juice. Shi Mengwan felt that this Xiao Qi was really a good person. He was very thoughtful. After Xiao Qi finished ordering, he returned the menu to the waiter. After the waiter left, he smiled. All right, even if you want to drink today, I won't order it. Why? I don't know how good your alcohol tolerance is. I'm afraid that you'll think that I deliberately forced you to drink. When the time comes, it'll be a little hard to explain. Shi Mengwan really smiled this time. My alcohol tolerance really isn't good. More importantly, it was really inappropriate for only the 2 of them to drink now. Xiao Qi nodded and looked at Shi Mengwan. Suddenly, his expression turned serious. I'm sorry. Did I scare you by coming here rashly? Shi Mengwan was a little embarrassed. Just as she was about to explain, Xiao Qi raised his hand. I was too rash. At that time, my mother asked me to go take a look, so I didn't think too much about it. I didn't expect it to cause you trouble and cause you to return to Lin City so early. It's none of your business. Shi Mengwan shook her head. I came back for something. That's good. Xiao Qi looked at her and confirmed that she really wasn't angry. I've already heard about your situation. I'll tell you about mine. I'm 29 years old this year. I'm currently working in a technology company. I'm currently the manager of the research and development department. At this point, he paused for a moment. Of course, this achievement is nothing compared to you setting up a studio at such a young age. There's no such thing. Shi Mengwan shook her head. I'm just lucky. She said this sincerely. Not long after she graduated, she set up her own studio. In addition to her own efforts, she also received help from her teacher and Su Qingsang. However, Xiao Qi was already a manager at such a young age, so he relied entirely on himself. Are we going to praise each other? Xiao Qi's teasing words made Shi Mengwan laugh, and she stopped arguing. I'm the 3rd child in my family. My eldest brother and second brother are already married and have children. I'm the only one in my family who's still single. At this point, Xiaoqi picked up the cup in front of him and took a sip. My parents have always wanted me to get married, but I didn't have this idea before. On one hand, I still want to work hard in our company. On the other hand, I had a girlfriend before. Because it was a long-distance relationship, distance and time made it impossible for us to maintain it in the end, so I really didn't have this idea before. I know that Miss Sher is a new woman, but I feel that for a blind date like us, if possible, it's better to explain everything clearly. That would be better, don't you think? You're right. Shi Mengwan nodded. You're still thinking about your ex-girlfriend, so no. Xiaoqi waved his hand. That part of it is already in the past. I'm telling you that I'm serious. I want to start a new relationship. So, I'm dating you on the premise of getting married. As for the conditions your family proposed, I don't disagree. Both of my brothers have sons. My parents have already said that I just need to be happy on my own. Xiaoqi's voice was neither fast nor slow, and his tone was as calm as usual. He was quite frank. He explained his situation clearly the moment he arrived. Seeing him like this, Shi Mengwan didn't know what to say. Miss Shi, do you not believe that I can do it? Xiaoqi put down the cup in his hand. Don't worry. Since I've agreed, I won't go back on my word. That's not what I meant. Shi Mengwan bit her lip, and a trace of hesitation flashed across her face. What I mean is that I basically understand your situation. But I might have to tell you about my situation. Go ahead. I'm 26 years old this year, and I have my own studio. Shi Mengwan thought about what to say next. Before President John. Xiaoqi exclaimed. His voice interrupted Shi Mengwan's words. The word President John made Shi Mengwan's heart skip a beat. The moment Xiaoqi stood up, she turned around and looked behind her. When she saw the person who came, Shi Mengwan's heart skipped a beat. President John. Xiaoqi walked out from his seat and greeted John Hauser. What a coincidence. I didn't expect to meet you here. Yes. Manager Xiao is here too. It's indeed a coincidence. John Hauser's voice was indifferent. He glanced at Xiaoqi, and his gaze seemed to sweep across Shi Mengwan without a trace. Eating with your girlfriend. Not for the time being. Xiaoqi, who had been talking confidently just now, smiled shyly. But I hope it will be in the future. As he spoke, he glanced at Shi Mengwan. Mengwan, this is our company's John Hauser, President John. President John, this is my friend Shi Mengwan. Hello, Miss Shi. John Hauser looked at Shi Mengwan and reached out his hand to her. Shi Mengwan sat there, her heart beating very fast. She had to use all of her self-control to prevent herself from revealing any clues. When she met Xiaoqi's gaze, she forced herself to stand up and reached out her hand to John Hauser. Hello, President John. She felt John Hauser's hand pinch her hand so hard that she felt a little pain. Fortunately, he quickly let go. Shi Mengwan's hand hurt. She quietly placed her hand on her body, gently clenched her fist, and then relaxed. Xiaoqi didn't notice her small movements, but John Hauser did. His gaze swept over the two of them. Are you guys on a date? At this moment, no one could tell the emotions in his pitch-black eyes. His voice was also indifferent, but Shi Mengwan could hear a storm brewing in his voice. Yes. Xiaoqi admitted it openly and looked at John Hauser. Is President John alone? Do you want to join us? This sudden invitation made Shi Mengwan widen her eyes and look at Xiaoqi. Was he crazy? No need. Your girlfriend will be unhappy. John Hauser's voice was still indifferent. Xiaoqi suddenly remembered that he was on a blind date with Shi Mengwan. How could he let his boss sit down on a blind date? Then, I have an appointment with a friend. I'll go see if he's here. Then please. Zhang Haoze nodded slightly and glanced at Shi Mengwan. Finally, his gaze returned to Xiaoqi. Put today's expenses on my account. No need, President Zhang. How can I accept it? It doesn't matter. After Zhang Haoze said this, he turned around and left. He didn't look at Shi Mengwan again. Shi Mengwan felt her legs go soft. After Zhang Haoze left, she sat down on the chair. Her face was a little pale. Mengwan. Xiaoqi called her and smiled first. I'm sorry, I called you by your name without your consent. It's mainly because I think it's weird to call you Miss Shi. It's okay. Shi Mengwan didn't take this matter to heart. We're all young people. There's no need to be so particular. Then you can just call me by my name. Okay. Shi Mengwan answered casually and picked up the water on the table and drank it in one gulp. However, she felt that not only was the frustration in her heart not suppressed, but it was also getting more and more intense. I'm sorry, I just invited President Zhang to dinner like that. Please don't mind. I especially admire him. Xiaoqi's eyes lit up. Shi Mengwan had been entangled with Zhang Haoze until now. She had always known that his current achievements might not be low, but she really didn't know what he did. You said he's your boss. He looks quite young. Yeah, our boss isn't even 30 this year. He's very powerful. When he was in university, he invested in a piece of software. That piece of software earned him his first bucket of gold. No, in fact, I heard that his first bucket of gold was earned through investing in funds. Later, he invested in our company's first software. At that time, no one wanted that software, but he had a good eye for heroes and bought it at a high price. His entrepreneurial story is a legend in Lin City. Really? Shi Mengwan poured herself a glass of water and drank it to hide her loss of composure. I really can't tell. Yeah, not only does he invest in technology companies now, but he also invests in some new energy industries. But what's even more praiseworthy is probably his devotion. Devotion? Shi Mengwan didn't seem to understand. She looked at Xiaoqi. What do you mean? Have you heard of the Qin family? Although they aren't as powerful as the Li family and the Su family in Lin City, the Qin family isn't ordinary either. It's said that Miss Qin is indebted to President Zhang. That's why he's been guarding Miss Qin for so many years. If nothing unexpected happens, they'll be engaged this year. Xiaoqi looked in the direction where Zhang Haoze disappeared. Do you know? President Zhang has a company under his name to work on, but his workplace is still in the Qin Corporation. Doesn't this mean that he values friendship? Shi Mengwan couldn't tell what she was feeling. She bit her lip and clenched her fists under the table to prevent herself from revealing any emotions. He's really a loyal person. Her voice was very soft, and it sounded like she was sighing. Xiaoqi looked at her and suddenly felt a little embarrassed. You probably don't like to hear this, right? I'm just too happy to see President Zhang. After all, we don't usually see him every day. It's okay. Shi Mengwan shook her head. Xiaoqi wanted to say something, but the waiter had already started to serve the food. Shi Mengwan fell silent as she picked up the knife and fork. She had never asked Zhang Haoze what he had been doing all these years. What was he doing? In the past, she felt that even if she asked, Zhang Haoze might not tell her. Later on, she didn't want to ask anymore. If he was willing one day, he would naturally tell her. But she had never thought that one day, she would get all the news about him through someone else's mouth. She thought of Xiao Qi's words just now. Was he deeply in love with Miss Chin? Maybe it was true. Shi Mengwan didn't know what to eat during this meal. Xiao Qi said something else in the middle, but she only responded with a few random words. Until her phone rang. It was Mother Shi who was worried and called to remind her to remember to meet Xiao Qi. After hanging up the phone and not seeing Zhang Haoze again, Shi Mengwan heaved a sigh of relief. When facing Xiao Qi, her attitude finally returned to normal. Mengwan, do you have any other plans later? No. After Shi Mengwan answered, she remembered that she actually wanted to go home and rest. Since that's the case, why don't we go watch a movie? Xiao Qi said tentatively, during the new year, there are a few movies that look good. Why don't we go take a look? Sure. Since she had already said it, Shi Mengwan had no reason to refuse. Moreover, it had indeed been a long time since she went to the movies. In the past, when Su Qingsang was free, she would follow Su Qingsang to watch it. However, recently, Su Qingsang was in a car accident, so Su Qingsang wasn't in the mood to go out to the party. Then let's go watch a movie. Xiao Qi looked very happy. It was obvious that he was satisfied with today's blind date. Let's go. Xiao Qi brought Shi Mengwan outside. When she was about to pay the bill, she was told that Zhang Haoze had already paid for it. Shi Mengwan didn't even see when he left. Her heart beat faster again. What did Zhang Haoze mean? She told herself that it might be because Xiao Qi was his subordinate. But deep in her heart, she knew that wasn't the case. However, she could only force herself to divert her attention and not think about Zhang Haoze. Instead, she focused on Xiao Qi. Xiao Qi chose this restaurant because there was a cinema nearby. He suggested that since they were too full at night, they might as well walk there. Shi Mengwan didn't object. When they arrived at the cinema, Xiao Qi asked Shi Mengwan which movie she wanted. Shi Mengwan didn't know either. She saw that there were so many people in the cinema. It was the new year, and the cinema was full. I'm afraid we can't buy tickets, right? At this moment, Xiao Qi took out his phone and waved it in front of her. I've already bought them. He said that he was worried that Shi Mengwan wouldn't be able to choose, so he even bought all the tickets for the 4 movies that were playing at this time. Shi Mengwan looked at Xiao Qi. She couldn't tell what she felt. This person was really attentive. In the end, the two of them chose a war movie that had a pretty good reputation to watch. The movie was a little noisy. From the beginning to the end, there were gunshots. Xiao Qi was very engrossed in watching. Shi Mengwan was originally a little absent-minded, but she could only let herself be engrossed in the movie. Who knew that halfway through the movie, her right hand would be held by someone? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.